Welcome to BS session number 110. A single conversation across the table with a wise man is better than 10 years' study of books. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Good conversation is as stimulating as black coffee and just as hard to sleep after. Annie Morrow Lindenberg. Conversation isn't just about proving a point. True conversation is about going on a journey with the people you are speaking with. Ricky May.
Nerd.
But some of these bullets, as you saw, have an incendiary device on the tip of it, which is a heat-seeking device.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
Welcome to your weekly dose of BS, the Holistically Speaking podcast.
How's everybody doing?
It's
Pretty
Friday.
good.
It's Friday.
It's Friday.
I like Friday.
And there's lots to talk about.
There is definitely lots to talk about. Daniel, how you doing? Did you get any sleep?
Not very much, because as people could probably see, there's a small child running around behind me that was sent home early from daycare because he's sick, because that's what flu season with 2 kids in daycare is basically just a constant cycle of disease. So no, not a ton actually. But hey, I'm here. It's Friday, like you said. I can sleep on the weekend. Just kidding. I actually have work to do. So
Jokes on us. How's the January issue going?
pretty good. Got some interesting content in there. Obviously, the gun stuff has shifted because the ban. So we've got to take a look at that. But we got some stuff on there on historical guns. Obviously, a lot on politics, both as a result of the December ban and the prorogation and all that sort of stuff. Some stuff happening down the road politics wise. Thing on radio communications, like a real idiot's guide to the old boofwang radio system, and a couple other things that I'm trying to get a handle on. I might have come across a system that would allow people to effectively use like a military style ATAC system. So non-cellular connected GPS location that can be shared via radio.
Is this Meshtastic?
Yeah. A mesh system that can.
We use that hunting.
Yes. So we're looking at trying to do, because there's a system out that the company that makes a bunch of these little tiny Meshtastic devices that are modular, they've just come out with one with GPS and a bunch of other stuff in it that I can use to try. And I'm going to basically try and set it up on ATAC and see how it works and do an article on that. Hopefully. I don't know if that'll happen for this issue though. They were trying to get me one in December, and I would have liked a little bit more lead time with it than this. So.
They're starting to come out with kind of all-in-one devices for that now, hey?
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat little system. Well, thank you very much, Zach. I'm assuming that he's putting me above the rest of you by separating me and not below the rest of you. So that's what I choose to believe.
He's part of my neighbor. He lives up the street from me.
Oh, does he? Is he that close?
His dog ran away once, got out of his house, and I ended up finding it because we lived down the street, and I was like, we both in the local neighborhood group were like, hey, whose dog is this? And Zach was like, that's my dog. I was like, oh, okay.
That's funny.
Did you ask him if his dog was insured?
No, that would have been a good one, though. I didn't think of that.
If his dog's not insured, then I don't know. I got to question Zach's life choices. So, JR, how are you doing?
I'm good. Good. It's been a busy week. And,
Are you still eccentric?
I am eccentric.
Are you still a crazy guy?
I'm still a crazy guy. I'm a wild and crazy
A
guy.
wild and crazy guy. Nobody under the age of 40 is getting that reference.
I get it.
Well, of course, Daniel gets it, but like Daniel's like a 30-something living in like a 70-year-old's brain.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the nicest possible way.
I
An
took it as a
old
compliment.
soul.
Like
Okay.
that hit like a compliment.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So, you got a new gun, JR. That's new.
Yeah, we got a new gun, and I want to send out to Dan. Let him, Mr. Fritter, there, and let him put it through its paces and tell us the good, bad, ugly, whether he likes it or not. And see what happens.
Looking forward to that. I got your email early today. I was gonna respond, but again, kids. So I'll
Yeah.
send you an email tonight because that was the game plan. So
Yeah, I just think it'd be fun. Like, it's funny because we, I want to get some really good feedback on the guns, so that we can say what's the Mark II going to be in a couple of years. Like, we got to start getting the feedback early. But I don't think you're going to find tons and tons wrong with this thing. So
I doubt it.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I really like. I mean, anything that's Canadian that is not banned, for lack of a better term.
Well, at this point,
it's pretty good
it doesn't
by my
matter.
books.
It doesn't matter
Yeah.
if it's Canadian. It's not
Yeah,
banned,
that's true.
Yeah.
right?
Can
And
we
I think- go
can
ahead.
we solve something really quickly? Because I since we've got you here, I'm going to ask you, because in videos you've said that the magazines do not drop free. Can we just clear the air? Is that out of an abundance of caution that you're saying that?
Well, the problem is when you're dealing with stamped magazines.
Yeah.
Right. The tolerances are never perfect.
Hmm.
It's not like when you're dealing with like say a Magpul mag. Well, almost every plastic mag, because it's molded, there's very little between a specific brand. There's very little change. However, when you're dealing with stamped magazines, and then with weld plates, it doesn't take much because it's steel to hang up.
Mhm.
So I would say that initially, if people have a real tight mag weld and they leave the action open and just play with it for about an hour, they'll drop super free. But
Yeah.
but it's kind of like the Swiss Arms, and I hate the word Swiss Arms. It's like,
That's quite the example you brought up there, Jay.
if you held the Swiss Arms, it would rock out, it would fall out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you held it at any kind of an angle, it wouldn't, because the way the lid
Yeah.
works. When you're dealing with MP5 mags, and they're a heavy mag, so it's not
Mhm.
like they're super light, like just like an Elander 5-rounder or something. There's a lot of heft to them. So I would say in a lot of guns, especially once they're a little bit of worn, they'll fall out. But we don't want people to have that expectation.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I figured you were getting at, because I know, like, the two that we've gotten, everybody can see that the maybe you can't see. You got to go this way. This is a clear rifle, and there's no ammunition anywhere near here. But we've found that with all of ours, they just drop free, and that's 2 rifles and 6 magazines, and all of ours, like 100% of ours, are dropping free. And obviously that's an example of 2. The reason I bring it up is there were a lot of questions on the videos that we put out about whether they are, whether they aren't. Of course, there were also arguments over whether they were MP5 magazines, but they're not actually MP5 magazines. They're SA90 magazines, which uses MP5 magazines. So there's a lot of goofy conversation going on the interwebs, but I just wanted to clear the air on that one if we could.
Now, I think we got to remember, let's go back to first principles. People are tearing something apart, the new rifle. But then you say, look at AR-15s. There is, I don't know, how many, Daniel, like 500 manufacturers now of AR-15s in the US alone.
Yeah.
And you
Minimum.
have $500 AR-15s, and you have $6,000-$7,000 AR-15s.
Right.
And people are forgetting, the same people who are hacking on other products forget that. I mean, these are all just variations on a very narrow theme. Right?
Mhm.
We're talking coatings, material, maybe tolerances, brand name, but they're all AR-15s.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think.
Well, and there's magazines for AR-15s. Like, there's a reason that every time somebody gets a new type of AR-15 that they're doing magazine tests on it.
Yep.
Yeah,
Because we've had batches. I got a batch of magazines from an Israeli company, not Elander, and almost they were plastic, and there was also, let's see, 20% of them didn't fit. They're plastic mags,
Mhm.
but we couldn't get 20% of the fit.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
So we didn't even sell. We condemned the whole lot. So you just never know. But we just wanted to let people know, like, we're testing all the magazines when they come in the country. Like, we got to make sure that they fit.
Mm-hmm.
But some are tighter than others. Like, because they're steel. Like, they're steel stamped mag.
Yeah, that makes sense.
No.
I'm
I mean,
picking
a
up.
lot of things, if like when you get something that's, some are tighter than others, and then you play with it for an hour and it loosens up miraculously. It's amazing.
Mhm.
Kind of a universal fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also think like perhaps
We're
people
just
listen
gonna
to
leave
this,
that one.
We
No
just-
one's
it's-
for that.
drop that one there. I've been waiting for that forever after he said play with it for an hour. And I was like, oh my God, come on, man.
Best 30 seconds of my day.
Women everywhere, like, yeah.
When we did that, the 3 black rifles in the previous issue, because there's been so much discussion around magazine compatibility with things like the Siberian and the WKs and all that. A lot of people, I think, probably just buy Magpul in reality. Like you look at a lot of guys' range bags, just Magpul PMags.
And
But
cross.
if you were to get a variety of mags, Elanders, steel, old school steel AR, aluminum USGI,
Yeah.
the cross mags that are made here in Canada, like the fit is extraordinarily disproportionate. Like cross mags fit way tighter in a mag well than a PMag does. And I think for, magazine design is so crucial to a functioning gun, and they're so hard to make. Like to make a custom magazine is quite a feat. So having to work with an existing magazine system, like for example, with the old rifles that we used to take at the WKs and stuff, to work with even Stanag mags, it would be very difficult to design a rifle from scratch that can work with all of those mags. And I mean, it's somewhat miraculous that the AR-15 does, but even there you get different reliability results with different magazines. So it's quite an interesting side of gun design. But I can't wait to see it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, magazines are an art in themselves. They really
I
are.
have no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
You look at 1911, like it's such a thing for like 1911 magazines are such a key functioning component of those guns that if you have a bad 1911 is, I wouldn't say more often than not, but very frequently simply a bad magazine.
Yeah.
You stick a Wilson Combat magazine, most 1911s, and they tend to work pretty well because it's such a functioning, like it's everything in that gun specifically. And I think that's it's really cool. So
Yeah. How about FOC? Changing to a different topic.
What
Yes.
something?
The FOC, so Firearms Outlet Canada, they had their city building, council meeting, and they got through the first hurdle of getting their building area zones and approval for a new range.
Oh,
it's going to
really?
be. I think they're going
Yeah.
to have an indoor skeet range too.
We'll see what they have. I mean, it's all fine, Dan, to say that until you start paying for it.
You know what? Either
Because
way, them.
That'd be a world-class facility in Canada if we have an indoor skeet range.
Yeah. I mean, they're I would say they're not common in the U.S., but they're more common. It's hard here because of the snow. Like we looked at that, we looked at building one, but the snow load on such an open area here makes it so difficult, like so expensive.
I imagine the air handling must be quite something too, because I mean, trap loads a lot of lead goes down ranges in a really light particulate format.
Yeah, but you're going away so far, and you're not having a lot of people shoot. Like if you think about it, they're probably doing like singles traps, so they can probably have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 shooters, and you never have lots of individual shooters. It's like one person at a time. So it's not like on an indoor range where you got 6 shooters blasting out, practicing their IPSC mag dump reloads. So you're creating all of these fumes. If you're just doing shotguns, you're firing and then waiting for the next clay to go, and in such an open area, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
So-
simple dilution.
But it's still the lighting, that open space, the snow load. Like there's a lot of engineering. So I wish him all the luck. It'd be good to have more options. I mean, I have a range, and he's an hour from my facility in Toronto. So I mean, it's not like it's competition, but it's not competition. That area could handle, I think, probably 3 or 4 more ranges, and we'd all still be really strong. So
Is that it for FOC, or is there more process with that, or is
I
it
think
like
they have more because they don't even have their that's I think that's the first step. Now they have to go into the developments and building and things like that. So it's probably still 18 months, 2 years away. But
okay?
remember, they've been trying now for 5 years or 6 years. So
Yeah.
this is a huge thing. Like this is for the shooting community. We should all be saying great things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, any legal battle that gets won is always going to be good in the long run for the shooting community as a whole, right?
100%.
So, so that's cool. What else did I miss? Is there any other news that I'm not aware of?
Sig had another recall.
What is it? The 320 again, or what's the?
No, it's not a firearm this time. It's the Romeo Red Dots.
Yeah,
are having some battery cap issues.
As in they're blowing up?
Something like that, I believe.
No,
There's
I
something
think,
wrong with the battery.
I think it's basically. I think it read that basically it's too easy to get into and too easy for kids to eat the batteries.
Yes, that's what it was.
is the actual.
Okay.
And you can see Gord chimes in that do not eat the Romeo 5 battery.
Oh my God.
How else will I get to gain its power if I don't eat it?
Are they going to have to engrave that on the outside of it?
I think
Do not eat the battery. Not for human consumption.
From Tide Pods to Romeo 5 batteries, what is this world coming to?
Jesus Murphy.
My question is, who ate a battery for them to have to put out a notice?
Well, that begs the question: did
Somebody in Florida?
Somebody, Florida eats Romeo 5 battery. That's insane. Poor Sig, man. They can't seem to do anything these days without having a recall something.
That's why Canadians hack on Canadian companies for issues. And yeah, we've done our fair share of beta testing, like as a community, but American companies do it all the time. I mean, SIG, they're getting their comeuppance for doing that, for beta testing on their client base, just resting on their laurels and releasing product before they've even actually tested them.
For sure. Well, I mean, the 320, I love my SIG Cross, but I mean, I'm so glad that I waited until after they fixed the trigger issue before I got mine. Because I mean, I can't imagine, you're just walking around with your rifle and all of a sudden it goes off. That's a pretty big thing to put out into the paying community. And the P320, how many recalls does the 320 have now? Like 3 or 4 times they've recalled it on separate occasions or something like that. And it's definitely shot close to half a dozen, regular consumers and police and whoever else. But yeah, it's a crazy thing. And it's not just SIG. I mean, we're talking about SIG, but it's not just them that has these problems. It's a lot of the gun industry.
Could you imagine having a SIG 320 and a Serpa mag?
A what?
Oh, you guys, the Serpa mags. Those were the first magazines. It was like Blackhawk, and it would have a little clip that went in and held the trigger, held the trigger housing in place. And those things were making firearms go off all the time. And they were blaming it on the Glock, but it really was the mag or the holster. So because it would flex. So it's like, yeah, friends don't let friends use Serpa mags.
Excuse me a second here, guys. I'm going to turn my microphone down because apparently I'm really loud.
Yeah, you were a bit loud there.
I think too that a lot of this, it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to think about with the way Canadian gun manufacturers are often treated versus U.S. gun manufacturers, and sort of a bit of the hard riding that Canadian gun manufacturers tend to often get from consumers. It is absolutely true that a lot of the U.S. manufacturers deal with exactly the same stuff. But even if you look historically, if you read about the AR-15's genesis, that gun was adopted by the military, and it took something like 4 to 6 years to finally get it through to mass adoption. And during that period, they made revision because they're having issues with it. And I think it parallels I was a bit surprised that SIG got the M17 contract, given the issues with the P320 that were sort of almost simultaneously coming about. But it almost seems like that gun's destined to have a similar trajectory to the AR-15, where it's seemingly getting quite refined and people are starting to quite like it, and it's becoming quite widely adopted now that it's getting fixed. But it's just the nature of the beast. Like, guns are complicated things. They seem very simple because a lot of the ones that we play with most of the time are crazy old. Like, when people are thinking about reliable guns and they think about, like, Mossberg 590s and Remington 870s and stuff, like the 870 is ancient. That's gun that's been around for decades. So of course it's reliable because it's been around forever. They figured out all the bugs. But all this new stuff, like I see in the chat there, like the Hudson 9mm, like it's a very unique new kind of design of gun. There's going to be teething issues. It's very difficult for companies even companies as big as SIG, to adequately test their product in a manner that would render it reliable in all conditions. Because when you think about all of the conditions that guns and optics are used in, they can range everywhere from, pure range toy, where the hardest thing it ever sees is the closing of a rifle case, to duty use, combat environments, like really adverse conditions where they just get beat to snot. It's really difficult to do that amount of testing. Like Hudson with the 9mm, that gun came out and it was like the darling of SHOT Show when it was launched. But the company is small. Before Daniel Defense bought it, they were not a big company. They did not have. There's no world in which a company that size has the budget to do adequate enough testing so that they can bring it out and say this is Glock reliable. It just, the only companies that can really do that are like Glock, FN. SIG should be able to with a lot of their stuff, but their product line is becoming so massive, it's probably getting hard to manage.
And their military contracts.
Colt is another one that you can generally, like, they do a metric ton of testing. And a lot of it comes from these are companies that are chasing military contracts where they'll want to see that they meet sort of the NATO version of ISO standards and whatnot. So yeah, it's quite interesting to think about, and it's something that Canadians would do well to keep in mind when they're looking at new Canadian guns and going, well, it's not very reliable. Well, yeah, it's, a tiny market. It's very hard for these companies to do adequate testing in every way. Like, even with the magazines, like we talked about, like, you could spend, if you bought one of every different kind of AR-15 magazine that was ever made just for testing, you would probably spend, I don't know how many thousands of dollars on AR mags. And then to test them with the ammunition, like when you start putting the numbers together and going, okay, well, how many rounds do you have to put through a magazine before you can deem it to be reliable with your gun? What is it, 30, 100, 1,000? Like, how many? If you had to do that for every magazine, add the cost of magazines, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars in ammunition magazines for just testing that single interface and component, right? It's not really tenable for a lot of business, especially with the scale of the Canadian industry.
That's kind of the thing, though, too, isn't it? That I think a lot of people probably forget is that, like, we're not talking about low price point stuff here. Like the R&D on this stuff has got to be astronomical. Like, obviously, out of the five of us that are talking out of our ass here right now, JR, you've got the most experience with this, and I'm not expecting you to spill trade secrets or all the beans or anything, but, like, I mean, just to try and develop a new firearm, we've got to be talking like minimums hundred thousands, if not
probably about $250,000.
Like, that's a lot.
Yeah, and the faster you want to do it, the more it costs, right? Because you're paying engineers, you're paying machine time. You can R&D and prototype on a 3D printer. We do tons. I mean, our resin printer is running all the time, because we'll come up with some crazy idea or somebody will send us something and we'll just rip it up. And now that you can, like, we do so much of our stuff with resin, and it's a ceramic. It's 80% ceramic, so there's very little shrink to it. But it adds up fast. I mean, even that stuff, a half-liter bottle is a couple $100. So just on 3D printing model stuff, we go through thousands of bucks. But you're saying testing, like Daniel hit it on. Like, so for the R18 Mark III, we're working on that. And for me, a sample that we can afford, and we're a small company, is we need 10 rifles, and we need 10,000 rounds through each of these rifles. So we need 100,000 rounds through these rifles. And if we get that without catastrophic failures, and we should get enough data, then we can say, okay, we're ready to go live. Right. So we'll have lots of other rifles testing, but we have a set 10 that we're working on our round count, right? So every round that gets through, like every time they do, good thing we get to use high cap mags, proper capacity magazines. So
Standard capacity.
Standard capacity. So we do them in 25 rounds, so then we can get 100 rounds through a gun fairly quickly. Then we can take a look at it and check it. So then we can getting those round counts out is easier than if we were stuck using 5-round magazines, because we'd spend half the day just loading mags. But like Dan said, like if you just pick the big ones, you got to pick like a Magpul Gen 2. You got to pick a Magpul's Gen 3. You need an Elander. You need like Rock River arms. You need a Stanag and probably a couple of Stanags. So you need probably 6 or 7 mags and a cross mag, because that's what people are going to shoot. Like if you can get it work with those, like I know our guns have never liked those 10 rounds. Those little pistol mags, little stubby
LAR
mags. None of our guns have liked the LAR mags, and so I just come to the point where I'm saying I don't care, because as long as I can get the P mags in there, Elanders, a Stanag, then we just tell people like it doesn't like the Rock River, like those little magazines. They just don't like it.
Yeah. Well, that was a big thing. We were doing all the testing, when all the 180s were coming out over the last number of years, and we were doing all the testing on the different types of 180 platforms. Every single one of them, we were doing a specific video on as many of the magazines as we have available to us. Is this one feeding well? Is this one dropping free well? Is this one over inserting? Is this one not over inserting? Does this one cause whatever? And it was especially with the 180 magazines, because there seemed to be such a difference between the 180 lowers and the AR-15 lowers, even with the cross magazines.
Well, the problem with it's not a problem. The difference between most Air 180 manufacturers and Air 15 manufacturers is how they make the magwell. So the magwells, I wish we had Phil here, because Phil's so good at this, because he's a mechanical engineer.
I'm hoping
smart. Yeah. So what most manufacturers in the U.S., what we do for our magwells now, is they're broached, which means you form them, right? So you kind of hog up most of it, and then you're basically cutting it out. So you get your nice corners, but you get really tight tolerances. Most manufacturers in Canada, they're hogging them out. They're machining them out. So that's why if you look at the corners, you'll see like a round. There's like almost like, because they have to drill almost and then come across, drill. So how they're making their magazine wells are very different. So if you're doing that, if your tolerances are out at all, then you can really it's easy to get over insertion of magazines. And that seems to be, so that's a commonality with a lot of Air 180 designs, is over insertion. And our Mark IIs, we still have it. So that's what we switched to, doing the broaching. So we're trying to get rid of the over insertion.
Yeah, because if you use, like, for those at home that might have one of these, if you take an AR-15 that's had either a broached or a wire EDM magazine well, which a lot of the Colt stuff is wire EDM, I believe, and you actually stick a mag in, like a Magpul, and you just rock it forward and back, you'll see a lot less play than if you've got a machined mag well. And that's, like JR said, that was what I experienced with a lot of these AR-180 type rifles, is once they get machined, that fore and aft dimension in the magazine and the relationship between the front and back of the magazine, the feed lips, and the magazine catch, the notch in it, creates a lot of conditions where you can get kind of a loose back and forth, and then you get those over insertion issues, bolt stoppages, too much drag, you name it. It's quite something. But it's this is also, for me personally, why I think guns are fascinating, because I love mechanical stuff, and geeking out on this stuff is always so much fun.
Well, they're not. Go ahead, Jared.
I was just saying, like BCL, they EDM most of their magwells now.
Yeah, I think a lot of the high end stuff went to EDM sometime in like the early 2000s, I think. But it's such an expensive technology to do. Like wire EDM is a very expensive way of removing metal.
It's cool though.
Yeah, it's so cool.
It seems like the cost is going down now, because I'm seeing people are building them themselves now. It's like metal 3D printing too.
When I think it's comical, like not comical, but I think it's quite interesting to think about the fact that, like, when Eugene Stoner designed the AR-15. He then designed something that was supposed to be cheaper than AR-15, and that was what the AR-18 came out as. Because at the time, the machinery required to make a stamped firearm was much more common, which made it much cheaper for countries. I mean, they're trying to sell it to militaries in its original full auto form, and they were trying to sell it into basically developing countries where the notion of having machine shops that can hog out aluminum at the rate that they're looking to do for AR-15 production was extremely expensive. Whereas now, like, desktop CNC is a thing. And then on the flip side is you try and find a machine that can bend you up a receiver. Like, I'm sure JR could probably speak to this, but if you were to call around to Canadian manufacturing shops and say, "Hey, I'd like to get a stamped steel AR-180 lower receiver made," the cost would be
astronomical,
steep compared to CNC, incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you look at the AR-180 uppers, how they get eaten alive without a steel insert in there, because it was designed steel on steel, so you didn't even think about it. Now we have this poor little 6061 aluminum upper, and that it just gets eaten alive, right? So that's why the stamped steel was so much better and so much more robust. But now we can't afford to build like that.
Welcome to the conversation, Vanya. I don't know why.
Hey!
My house.
Hey.
The exact same living room.
It's a virtual screen in the back there, yeah.
Well, I should put the exact same one on so we look like we're in the same house.
But then put a split screen, so it's like you're next to each other, but not.
Just kind of lean over, yeah.
Yeah, can we arrange where people sit in this?
Let's do a quick recap here just for everybody who is maybe joining us and doesn't know who all of our guests are. Obviously, me, Derek, and Mike are 3/4 of Ballistically Speaking, but we have joining us Vanya Kurtalitsa from Apex Optics. We have Daniel Fetter, Caliber Magazine, and J.R. Cox, Sterling Arms International. Three very well-known pillars of the gun community that we've just, we really did no intro today. And, we're kind of having this conversation impromptu. I contacted everybody maybe, like 2.5 to 3 hours ago now. We had another guest scheduled for tonight. Unfortunately, they had to drop out on us. We were like, oh, we're just going to go it alone. And then JR happened to give me a call, and he says, who's on the show tonight? And I said, nobody. They left us. And JR was like, why don't you just get a whole bunch of guys, call Daniel, Vanya, and Phil Odell, and let's do a round table. We're like, okay, let's do that. We're still hoping that Phil Odell will be able to join us. People actually like him.
Oh.
He was in demand today, so hopefully he'll come on later. But that's what we're talking.
Dan,
about.
I did suggest him to give you a call too.
Well, thanks, Jer. Nice to be thought of.
Yeah.
No, he didn't. He didn't say.
Chris doesn't think of anybody.
All my idea.
And I apologize for being tardy as well. We were in the process of we were transiting from California to Arizona. So we're in for the night now. So we're good.
Oh, you're in the hotel room?
No, we have our fifth wheel with us. So we were.
Can't you tell from behind him?
No children behind me. They're in the other trailer. They're with the in-laws. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were Palm Springs, then we went to Anaheim, and then came back through Palm Springs to go to Arizona for a bit. So we're kind of the Havasu area right now. So we're just kind of trying to do a little bit of the kind of a little bit of Christmas, and then pre-SHOT Show insanity. Try to have a little bit of family time while trying to work still. So it's been interesting.
So
are you taking the trailer to SHOT Show?
No.
Oh yeah, they're all living in it.
Yeah.
Camping in Vegas is different than camping everywhere else.
Well, the camp said that we're going to stay out of Vegas. We read the reviews, and we're like, yeah, no, thank you. Apparently, it's in a very seedy area, and it's about one of the only ones you could stay at. So I'm not going to even go there. We shouldn't bore everybody with my travel plans, but yeah.
Okay. We had a question, actually, that what was this question? Bending keeps complaining about my microphone now. I think it's because I actually played in my microphone, and then I don't talk very monotone, so sometimes I'm loud and sometimes I'm not. Here we go. We had a question from Spud that I thought was kind of an interesting question. Is there a market study before creating a new firearm? So we've got a firearm manufacturer. We've got somebody who's a journalist very much in the know with firearms, and we've got a non-firearm manufacturer. Let's kind of expand this question a bit. And what sort of market studies are you guys aware of, or have you done yourselves, period, when coming up with a new product? Or is that really as much of a consideration in our market?
You want to do it that one, JR, or do you want me to go?
You can start that up because you can talk about the market study for new optic.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, generally speaking, we talk to a lot. We do a lot of our own internal market analysis before we ever launch a product. Sometimes we want to make something just because it's cool,
valid,
and something that we want to use, and we figure that a lot of other people are going to want it as well, which is kind of how the red dots came about. But I think a lot of times, we don't do any kind of formal market studies or anything like that, just because it's a lot easier for us to kind of talk to our customers, and we get a lot of requests in person directly at trade shows and matches and everywhere we go all the time about what are the kinds of things that we need to be making, or a lot of people will volunteer a lot of cool information, and a lot of times, sometimes people and will tell you things that you're like, yeah, that sounds cool, but I'll sell like 5. And we never really pursue any products that don't have a lot of commercial viability, honestly. If I can't sell, a bunch of them, then we're not going to be able to make any money and keep the company alive, right? So that's really what it comes down to. If we end up making some really cool stuff and we'll make, 10 of them, then that's kind of just an internal personal project that a lot of times we'll mothball some things because, we'll prototype, we'll do a prototype run of 20, 30 of them and then be like, okay, yeah, this is cool. But at the end of the day, it wasn't really what I thought it was going to be, or we're not really going to make a lot of money selling it. There's not a lot of commercial viability. Then, we'll just make them for ourselves. But other than that, we're not really going to proceed with it. So it's kind of the same thing, I imagine, for pretty much any product lineup. You have to make sure that 1, it functions well. 2, it does exactly what it's intended to do. And we're always of the opinion that we're not going to make something just because everybody else has the same product in their lineup, in their SKU line, and their dealers can order it. So you make some money because they order it, and they're going to make some money, and great. But now, how is it different from every other XYZ widget of that variety in current production? So a lot of times that kind of goes into our analysis fairly substantially.
Oh,
hey, Phil. So, yeah.
Okay, carry on, Vanya.
Yeah, so that's really a lot goes into it. I mean, we have a very long R&D cycle. I think a lot for us, typically it's between 18 and 24 months before any product from concept to kind of that ideation through engineering goes through the phases and testing before we ever decide to pull the trigger and announce it. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting for us, but we do get a lot of recommendations and suggestions from not just from customers, but also from our pro shooting team, which is substantial in size by now. But so we have a lot of cycling that happens all the time, and I'm kind of buried in new product development pretty much 99% of my day every day. So,
oh wow,
what I'm hearing a lot out of that is that it's a lot of internal market research. Like talking to the people in the industry. Like, is anybody, now that we've got Phil here, obviously we've got another brain to pick on this question. Also, like, do any of you guys engage in like paid market demographics or anything like that? Like, is that even worth doing in this industry?
I mean, I've tried to, but in different ways. Like, I've been trying to get funding because it's not super expensive, but it isn't cheap, obviously.
Yeah.
But I've been trying to get market research done, not necessarily. I mean, by some extension for industry members and advertising clients and stuff, so we can say, hey, what kind of gun is someone thinking about buying? Because a lot of magazines will do that. Once a year, they'll do a readership survey to find out what do you want to buy next year? What's your interest? Mm-hmm. Are you going to buy a reloading press in the next 12 months? That kind of stuff. We've all seen these questions. But also from the political standpoint of, where do people stand? Because I think, as we've discussed in the past, like the political attitudes of gun owners are probably a lot more diverse than a lot of the people on this podcast watching it probably think of a lot, because there's a lot of gun owners that they're kind of casual gun owners, right? So what is sort of the idea of pro gun mean to a lot of gun owners and stuff? I'd like to find out, but it's quite difficult to do. Because from my experience, a lot of folks in the industry, it's a tough industry to have trust in. There's a lot of folks that they don't really want to necessarily work together a ton if they feel that it's going to give someone else a competitive advantage. So that's been kind of a difficult thing to get around, but I'm hoping that we can get that done in 2025.
Cool. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me, actually, when you're talking about specifically like the magazine, right? Like that's, I totally get that. Phil, you said that you guys don't, right?
No, I mean, in a lot of ways, we're in the business of selling fun, and so that kind of sells 12 months. And you talk about casual gun owners. Well, probably the biggest group of casual gun owners in Canada are hunters. They don't have that many guns. Now, there are certain people who are extremely avid and they have a large number of guns. And Chris, you may know one of them. But a lot of hunters don't. And you've got a lot of people, a lot of the native population would fall into this category. They're gun owners. They have PALs. But they don't have 10, 15, 20 guns. That's your sport people. That's your range people. They're the ones that have got a lot of that. So when you're surveying and you're looking at demographics, you've almost got two completely different groups that are going to respond very differently to any survey. And I mean, we sell a certain amount of stuff. And we always get frustrated because, there's certain comments that, hunting guns don't sell. Well, they do, but they sell at a very different rate to the newest, pick on our TM22. That came in at the right time. It's in the right caliber. One of the greatest Canadian pastimes, there you go, is called plinking. Yeah. The rest of the world doesn't get that. Even our partners we're talking about, and he says, what is plinking? It's like he's got a bad taste in his mouth. It's like, well, that's the number one pastime for Canadian shooters.
Yeah.
Collectors and the range guy. I put the collectors in with the range guys because the collectors largely they'll be out at the range, taking shots with some esoterically odd thing that they've picked up. And wonderful people. I love collectors. So much I are one. But collectors are in that group of avid firearms accumulators. The casual people, that's a different group, and I think it's heavily represented by hunters. And I love my hunters. I don't say that in any bad way. Beware the man with one rifle. He probably knows how to use it. And it's a true statement. But in terms of a survey, it's interesting because you really do have, from our experience, two completely different groups.
Would you say that hunters are easy to survey, or are they difficult to survey? Because they seem like they're less engaged in the industry. Is that fair to say, or?
They're probably less engaged. Okay, I could take, I look at the 7 guys on the screen. And if I was to say, okay, I mean, I can ask questions right down to how do you, bore area. And everybody on the screen is going, well, yeah. Well, if 1 in 100 firearms owners in Canada knew what the hell you were talking about by bore area, I would be surprised if it was that. This is literally the 1%. I talk to this about Ben all the time because he says I'm a typical hunter. It's like, not a chance in hell are you a typical hunter. You are the 1%. You're an avid guy. You're a gear hound. You do this. The typical hunter isn't. I'm not even a typical hunter. A typical hunter, in Canada, is a very casual individual. They like what they do. They may be a single species hunter.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of that. So to survey them, your first thing is you have to educate people before you can survey them. And I mean, this Dan can talk to this because he's done this a bunch of times. When you talk to people about firearms legislation, and guns, do this, do that, do that. And the more you educate people on what we actually go through to even purchase our first firearm, all of a sudden, that attitude goes 180 degrees. So if you want to do a survey, doing a survey is one thing, but you've got to kind of qualify the people you're talking to say, and I'm not saying this meanly. I'm not saying this meanly. I'm saying this because we have 7 of the most intelligent people in the gun industry that have massive background and understanding technically.
And Chris.
That's not one of them.
I was waiting for that. I knew that if JR didn't make that comment, I knew that somebody who was watching would have made that comment.
Well, I could have thrown in even Chris.
Well,
I was trying to be nice.
Well,
Bill's just trying to butter me up before SHOT Show. That's all.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So JR, you're the only one we haven't really polled on this. I mean, do you guys are you guys more like the internal polling, kind of like what Vanya was talking about? Have you employed third-party companies like Daniel has talked about? Do you just kind of like,
I'm way too cheap to employ people in that.
Okay.
But we go out and we ask a lot of people, because we'll go to ask people who are shooting competitions and then just do tons and tons of, YouTube sleuthing and see what's going on and see where the market's going, because you'll see there's a very different split for what happens in Europe versus what happens in the US, right? Mm-hmm. So you'll see a far more of an elegance in the change in the industry in Europe, while you'll see much more of the tactical stuff in the US. Not exclusively, but so I think you have to look at we're trying to look at a worldwide approach and say, where do we think the market's going in the US, in Europe? Because we're trying to position, when we're trying to do is come up with firearms that are not Canada specific. That's like a little R9. I personally think that once we get it out there and we have some fun with it, it's a perfectly good gun for the US. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to look at guns, make guns that will survive post OIC. I'm trying. I got to constantly be the ever optimist on here. Phil and I have had this conversation, because I have to believe that there's going to be life after an OIC. We'll change governments. OIC will go away. When the OIC goes away, then all of a sudden, and now we have the second OIC goes away, there's going to be a lot more competition on the market.
Yeah.
And that should also push us. So I need a gun, I need firearm in our arsenal that will survive that. Mm-hmm. Right, that's what we need. So all of our design, all of our R&D, and we spend a ton of time on R&D, time and money on R&D, because we need firearms that are going to survive that. But then we have to say, okay, but how do we get international feel on this, right? But there's just some things that are outside of our ability in Canada. The manufacturing is just too bloody expensive.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at how many the Turks built an assload of lever action shotguns just because it went around the Australian rules, and they're trying to sell them elsewhere, and nobody particularly wants them. So JR is exactly right. You really got to be careful what you're putting money into for a longer term view.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, yeah. Which is also a good segue for us guys, because I think this is a great opportunity when we have the 4 of you all in one virtual room here. Let's go kind of around the table again, but let's talk about the Ordering Council. And the reason I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about this is one thing that kind of caught me by surprise over the last couple of days. Obviously, last weekend we were out in Calgary with JR and we did the video on this sucker here. It's about to be coming out, and it's getting a tremendous amount of attention, especially compared to what Canadian gun YouTube videos typically get. We're in the tens of thousands that we're talking about now. And it is an overwhelmingly positive, but at the same time, I was very surprised by the number of people that make the comments like, "Oh, here today, gone tomorrow. Don't bother; it's going to get banned. There's going to be another OIC. In this country, there's no point in buying anything anymore." There seems to be a lot of the like given up, kind of sentiments. And JR, you were just saying a second ago that like in your position, you have to kind of look over the next peak, look over the next hill, so to speak. You have to have that optimist kind of viewpoint. And if there's one thing I think that all four of you, like getting to know all four of you, that has really left an impression on me personally, is the optimism that all four of you guys have in an industry that is constantly trying to kick you in the nuts and take you up. But like all four of you do a really good job at always like getting up and dusting yourself off and just kind of going around the room real quick. Like JR, like everything that you come out to try to serve the community, it's friggin' banned. Like Phil, having to pivot all the time. You get this one really cool semi-automatic shotgun, and 3-gun guys are really starting to like it. Boom, banned. Have to go to something else. Vanya, obviously everything that affects the gun industry affects the optics industry just the same. So you're dealing with those exact same types of issues. Plus, you opened during COVID. The supply chain, shipping, all of those, a ship getting stuck in the friggin' a canal in Central America, and all of a sudden it affects your business. Yeah, exactly. Port strikes. Daniel, you're trying to just get a magazine out to people, and Canada Post decide, it's Christmas time, let's go on strike. Like, there's a lot to be that could really be like have a guy throw his hands up and like, fuck this, I'm going to go flip burgers at Wendy's. But you guys especially don't. So let's kind of go around the table. Let's talk about the OICs, what you see coming, why and how you guys dust yourselves off all the time and continue seeing the rainbow after the rain. Who wants to go first?
Not it.
Not it. That's not very
optimistic. For sticking my nose in where it doesn't belong.
All right.
The kudos goes out to the Canadian gun owner. You do hear, and the media will make a point, not Dan, because Dan is actually a sane, decent human being, but the larger media will always pick the worst possible representative. That's been their history, and that's what they've gotten hundreds of millions of dollars from Trudeau to continue to portray. The Canadian gun owner is one of the most amazing, durable, resilient people. I mean, they're as resilient as our military when they get thrown into shitty situations. They just come through. And the gun owners it's like, okay, we can't have that. Well, what do you got? Oh, shit, that goes bang. We can have fun with that. I'll take two. So, God love the Canadian gun owner, first and foremost. And every one of them that you talk to that's listening, absolutely, please, say thank you, because those of us in industry don't exist without them. And we're
here.
Yeah, we're a step away from the direct contact, except for things like the Sportsman Show. So we don't get a chance to say that probably as much as we should. But the Canadian gun owner has been such an incredibly durable person. And I'll tell you, the image of the Canadian gun owner is changing. Used to be some crazy-ass, miserable, sumbitch, ugly guy like me. But now, like, we've got, you look at our pro staff. Half our pro staff are wonderful young women that have got into this sport, and they love hunting, they love camping, they love all aspects of the sport. They love competing with handguns and shotguns. So the image of the sport, I think, is changing, and it's very poorly reported. So that is one thing I look forward to with the change of government, is to getting people to see who really is out there participating. As far as the OICs go, I mean, yeah, let's have some numbers. The first ban, 20 May, took away 47% of my business. So that's what it cost me. That didn't include what they then came along with a subsequent follow-on, which took another several percent, and then the follow-on handgun ban, which also codified a lot of that first May ban, took another 15 or 16% at the time, and they're talking about some other potentially going after some of our other products. And if they're going after the things that are rumored to be on the next list, having recovered from the 47% drop, we've been flat in sales for about 3-4 years because they take away a third of our business, so we have to build it up. And again, those Canadian gun owners have helped us do that by buying our new products. But we're looking at probably another cycle of that, losing a third of our business, and that's gonna happen. And unfortunately, the government, even though they've probed Parliament and they're not doing much of anything except collecting a salary for sitting on their ass, they will get enough cabinet ministers together to pass some OICs and make our life miserable. And those things, sadly, are enforceable. So that's going to continue to carry on. So that's what I see going on. So we're looking, like JR said, at alternate products. We probably are more Canada-centric than JR because he's heavily involved manufacturing as well as distributing. And we're really distributors. But I've got a few things coming down the pipeline which I think are going to be very cool. Some of them will be going forward. Some of them will be reachbacks to classics that have always been very popular in Canada and are maybe not available to the new generation of gun owners. They've seen them. Their parents have talked about them. Their grandparents have talked about them. Maybe they've shot Pop's version of this rifle. And, our goal is to give them something fun that they can then have.
The Canuck blunderbuss.
I'm not that old, JR. You're the blunderbuss expert. I did start with rifling.
To that point, Phil, you guys have, I think, done a really good job, especially lately, of picking guns that aren't on the immediate chopping block. Like especially this 357 lever gun that you guys have come up with is absolutely genius because people are really excited about them on one hand, and on the other hand, it's a safe, at least for right now, it's a safe bet on the community.
Well, and 44 Magnum is coming.
And it's a great price point.
Phil, don't tell me that. I just bought a 44 lever gun. Now I need to buy two?
Yes. You can never have too many.
Why would you be buying guns without talking to me?
Well, because I'm an idiot, Phil, obviously.
That's why we said and Chris.
You got to understand, you always got to have a comparison case.
Well, that's
and you're in the media, you're in the review business. You've got to have a comparison case. So you're just pre-planning.
Well, and I think we can make this work because I'm doing one of those Midwest Industries customs on a Henry. I'm having that done right now. So then I'll get like the wood grain Canuck in 44 when you get that out, and that'll be a really nice comparison.
Yeah, with our genuine color case hardened receiver.
Ooh, I seen that case hardening needs to make a comeback, in my opinion.
Oh, I tell you, I watch the guys that do the case hardening, and they are. It's a 100%. This is an artistic process. There's a certain amount of science to it, but they can change how the colors flow and the colors ripple, and you watch them. They're beautiful, and every single receiver is unique. Every single one is hand done, and it's unique.
That's awesome.
That's pretty cool. I'm gonna just interrupt us for a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's. Half our sponsors are here, so we might as well
paying our bills just by inviting these guys on.
Might as well make it official and recognize all of our sponsors.
Derek, you can start reading them now.
Oh
We'll
no!
start reading them. We are brought to you by call sign 66, Canada's best rifle training. Welcome to the Brotherhood. Book a course now at callsign66.ca and follow them on Instagram at callsign66 and on Facebook at C/S66.
And we're also brought to you by Rimstone Gunsmithing, craftsmanship done right. Contact Oscar at rimstonegunsmithing.ca and breathe life back into any firearm.
And March Scopes Canada, the Dion Optical Design line of rifle scopes, has a scope for all of your hunting and shooting needs. Find Doug and Niza at marchscopes.ca. I talk shit about having all of our sponsors on here, and then our first three sponsors are not with us tonight.
That's why I said recognizing the rest of our sponsors.
Yeah, exactly.
This one is here, though. Apex Optics. When you buy Apex, precision comes standard. Check out all the fine competition rifle scopes, red dots, and binoculars at apexoptics.co. The Atom and Fusion red dots have arrived. Get yours today. And I'll also add in, I do believe there will probably be some new announcements at SHOT Show. So I would probably stay tuned.
We'll leave that for the end.
Yes.
And we also have Ian Precision Rifles in Vegreville, Alberta, building Canada's finest precision rifles. Find Shane and Steve on Facebook, Instagram, and on their website at emprifles.ca.
And Bolt Action Coffee, bringing specialty coffee to the precision shooting world. Order coffee and merchandise at boltactioncoffee.com.
Odell Engineering. Pick up a Canuck shotgun or a Bergara rifle from your local distributor and tell them Phil sent you. Look them up on Instagram, Facebook, and on their website, odellengineeringltd.com.
And rounding it out, we have Sterling Arms International, home of the R18 Mark III and the R9. Contact them at sterlingarms.com and look for the R9, which should be in stores fairly soon, from my understanding.
And look for the Mark III as soon as Pierre Poilievre is Prime Minister.
Yes.
You know what's funny, JR?
And the
I
R15.
built the first rifles for the RCMP and fisheries and the parallel services in Ottawa was the R7 and the R8. So now I'm getting, and I ended up, they came back into my possession, which we won't get into because it's dodgy. But I now have, I'm looking forward to my R9.
And you, Chris sent you the picture. We have your number, your specific serial number put away for you.
Yes, he was teasing me with that picture.
Yes.
I'm not very sorry, but I did leave a couple of fingerprints on it for you.
Excellent.
But I wouldn't let him shoot it. That's for you.
Yeah, I didn't even ask to shoot it. I knew the answer was going to be on that one. And I'm probably going to regret leaving the fingerprints on it because now Phil can frame me for whatever he wants. But
just incriminated yourself.
Yeah, no, have it. Hey, before we're done with all
that may be useful.
You know, Daniel may not be a direct sponsor of the show, but Caliber Magazine is kind of like Canada gun industry sponsor. They sponsor us with information, and they sponsor us with news, and entertainment, articles, and you know, especially like print media is going the way of the dodo, and Caliber Magazine is still
in Canada.
Well, especially in Canada. Yep.
No, because in a lot of places in the world, print is still strong.
Okay, well, Canada is. I'm going to be Torontonian here and pretend that we're the cover leaders. So I a special mention to Daniel and Caliber Magazine for continuing to put that out to the industry.
So, thank you.
There you go.
Guns and Ammo meets Vogue and Life, all in one.
Well, where,
with a little bit of EQ.
I think it's like going back to the thing about optimism. That's sort of where some of mine comes from.
Yeah.
Is I like politics. I don't like covering this stuff. I would much rather just write about guns and the history of guns and the design of guns and reviews of guns and that sort of stuff. But with that May 2020 ban, much like Phil, it took away so much of what we talked about. Like this magazine came about in no small measure because we can't do the same things with an AR-15, for example, that you could do in the States. So I would buy U.S. gun magazines prolifically, and I'd read it, and I'd go, 80% of this magazine doesn't pertain to me, because they'd be talking about, going coyote hunting with an AR-15, which, it's not a thing. And then the rest was concealed carry, which we can't do. So taking a lot of that stuff away has presented a lot of problems, both with regards to like ad sales, obviously, but also too, it's just editorial planning. So we transitioned to going, we need to keep people informed. It's more important now that gun owners have good access to solid information that's well resourced, well researched, verifiable. Because the more this stuff happens, the more we kind of need to be all on the same page. Because going back, gosh, when was it? Probably 20 years ago, when they were trying to get rid of the long gun registry. I would hand out pamphlets at my local gun club trying to get people to get notice on this and email their MPs. And guys would talk about how, like, no, we need to keep the long gun registry because it lets them catch criminals when they commit a crime, because it's like CSI. They find a bullet and they match it up to your gun because it's registered. And like just this gross level of misinformation out there, and going like, this is when we need to keep people really informed. So that's where like I find my worth there, and then the optimism kind of comes out of that. And I think I echo Phil's sentiment. I was going to say that it's the enthusiasm of the Canadian gun owner that really keeps it going, because people are rabidly into this stuff in Canada, the guys that are. And I also will say, like, it's really cool as someone that's kind of observing the industry and the hobby and community and the sport. The diversity that exists in our community is tremendous to see, because there's like both within the actual shooting community, the people, there's old, there's young, there's guys, there's girls, there's all sorts of people, which is awesome to see. But for someone who's like really into the technical and mechanical side, our gun community in terms of a marketplace has been, I would say perhaps the term would be like disproportionately diverse, because of the legal regulatory framework that we've had, where in the States, to be quite blunt, the AR-15 and a Glock are kind of the, there, you've got those, you're equipped for whatever you need to be doing. But in Canada, because of the rules that we've got, people that own handguns don't own them for an explicit reason, like in the States, where it's just you get a compact Glock because you concealed carry to save your life, and it's a simple solution. We own them, like a lot of handgun owners are collectors. They shoot for those esoteric reasons, like has been mentioned. So you get these fantastic, bizarre guns that you don't, like Arsenal Strike 1s. Also guns that come in from other countries that you can't get in the States, like the Norinco CF98 that, they can't even get that in the States. The early Israeli Tavors, Norinco M14s, the stuff that they couldn't get in the States. Then you even get into stuff where like Robinson Arms was fantastically popular in Canada until they were banned because of the different sort of nature of the regulations. So we get, we have these, when you go to a gun range in the States, you'll just see a lot of guys shooting AR-15s and Glocks. You go to a gun range in Canada, you'll see some guys shooting like some black powder thing that I have no idea what it is. You'll see Arsenal Strike 1s and 1911s and old Browning high powers and Lee Enfields and AR-15s, and such an interesting set of guns that it's been really fascinating to sort of observe this. And I think that with what's been going on, to sound incredibly optimistic, with what's been going on, it sucks. There's no getting around it. Like, we want these guns back. But I do kind of love watching our community adapt and overcome these hurdles, and talking about things like 357 and 44 mag lever guns. I love lever guns. I've always loved lever guns. But I can tell you that 10 years ago, we couldn't spend a lot of page space talking about lever guns because most people didn't care. They wanted to know about the newest non-restricted AR-15 type rifle, or the newest AR-180 type rifle. But now that they're being forced into it, unfortunately, but they are still enthusiastic about it when they get there. And I think it's going to be really cool that when the OIC is repealed, which hopefully is going to be soon, that we will be more diverse than we've ever been, because we'll have gun owners who, once you get a lever gun, like a 357 mag lever gun, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the best guns ever. Once you have one, you'll love it forever. When you can buy your AR-180 or your AR-15 again, you're just going to add that. And you're going to get owners who don't have this kind of single focus on semi-automatic black rifles, or, another one is like skeet and trap shooters, who obviously aren't affected, but like those guys buy one gun for like 50 years. There's a lot of people now that are experimenting with different kinds of guns than they probably would have if things hadn't shifted. So I think it's kind of neat that, in 2 years' time, I'll be very interested in seeing what people are buying and what they're interested in. what sort of shooting sports are growing in popularity. Because I mean, we've seen the rise of 22 precision competitions tremendously in these last few years. That may not have happened if we still had AR-15s, because, for example, maybe then we'd be doing 3-gun, and that'd be kind of dominating the space. So it's really cool to see how things could be changing.
Very cool. Yeah. Not much of a surprise to me that you guys are crediting very similar things, you and Phil.
The other thing I'd like to add with Caliber is, Dan, you provide a service. You may not see that way, but you'll cover historical firearms that I didn't even know exist. I remember you were on another podcast I was listening to, and you mentioned a Savage broad arrow marked lever gun for World War II. I didn't even know that was a thing, and I have a somewhat decent knowledge of firearms.
But that's sort of what, like, I've always viewed that was, historically speaking, what I've kind of considered the most important job to be before all the political stuff came up and I had to learn how to report on all this stuff and file ATIPs and whatnot, was because I buy a lot of gun books at auction, and I'm very jealous of Phil's gun book collection because it's tremendously huge. But a lot of these books are out of print, and they've been out of print for a very long time, and you can't find them at bookstores and stuff like that. And unfortunately, just the nature of, I guess, the gun community and the ages that were in play and kind of a lull in the 90s, there's a lot of information in printed books about RCMP rifles and C Broad Arrow Savage rifles for the Pacific Coast Militia Rangers in small volumes before they bought the Winchester contract. But like, all of this stuff is in books, and I really like taking this stuff and digitizing it for the new age so that it can kind of be out there again. And it's stuff like, you know, I'm hoping to put together a pretty lengthy article on the history of Dimaco, which I'm hoping Phil will contribute to. Gary Crocker, some of those guys, to get this article down, because there's so many other companies like Para, as we've talked about. Like, the history of Para building 1911s in Quebec is fascinating. If no one is writing this down, then it just gets forgotten. And I think that's part of this. Is, from my perspective, the history is our culture, right? So it's important to take this down, and I take that particular commitment quite seriously in terms of trying to get this stuff down, disseminate that information, and make sure it's out there in a long-lived format that isn't just, you know, some obscure book that you buy at auction because you've been looking for it for like 4 years. So,
Okay, Vanya or JR, who's next?
Do you want to go, Van?
Sure, no problem.
Van's like, I don't want to go. I'm not a person.
Well, no, I think it's kind of an interesting thing from our perspective. Like, it's kind of twofold, right? Because as a business, we're not a firearms business, but we're closely intertwined with it. I mean, if people aren't buying guns, they aren't buying optics, like you guys said before, right? So, you know, your customer base dies down. But at the end of the day, first and foremost, like, we're gun owners, we're community members, we're enthusiasts, we're sport shooters, we're hunters, all those things. So everything affects us through and through. You know, there was lots of talk about them banning a whole swath of, you know, bolt action rifles, which they obviously did with the first OIC ban, and then the C21, and then the stupid regulations around bore diameter and all that stuff around the shotguns and all that kind of stuff. So all that kind of does affect us on a personal level. From a business perspective, yeah, it shrinks our Canadian market substantially. And at the end of the day, we want Apex to be associated with Canada because we're a Canadian company. We're based out of Canada. We operate out of Canada. We're born and we grew in Canada. So that's where we started from. And then, yeah, of course, there's the U.S. market, which is very important to us because it's a natural growth market for us. Because, you know, obviously shooting in the U.S. is very ubiquitous. Shooting sports, hunting, tactical, plinking, or whatever you want to call it, you know, kind of the casual user is also a very big buyer in the US, right? They buy a lot of stuff. Now, whether they will buy Apex stuff, I don't know, because we might be out of their price point for, you know, they're used to the, you know, a $50 red dot as opposed to like a $350 red dot. So that's to be determined. But at the end of the day, you know, we want to see the Canadian market grow and thrive. And like Daniel and Phil so eloquently put, you know, the Canadian user is being pigeonholed into a smaller and smaller and smaller, ever shrinking subset of firearms that they're allowed to own and use. And just because we're still allowed to keep them, like our AR-15s, you know, in our safes as safe queens for the government, you know, to safely store it on their behalf in our, you know, our personal property, in our personal property, until that gets repealed, you know, you kind of don't have a choice, right? You kind of go, okay, well, if I want to go to the range, or if I want to take my family out this weekend and we're going to go, have some nice, just like a nice range day out, you got a Chinook in Calgary and it's supposed to rain apparently tomorrow. So you go out to the range and you go, okay, well, what can I bring with me? And out of the entirety of my entire collection, I'm allowed to bring like 3 things now, as opposed to, 15. So as a user, that sucks. But, like Daniel mentioned, it did kind of start forcing me into evaluating certain things. Like, I've always wanted a lever action, but I never thought I would get a lever gun. So, over the last year or so, I'm like, which one of these 15 options should I get? Because there's so many. I know a Canuck is definitely on the list. So, of the ones to get, and I will get. But at the end of the day, from an Apex perspective, it really it shrinks our market down substantially, because when people aren't buying, like if we stayed in our kind of a PRS space and just never went outside of PRS and long range, bolt action rifle space, we probably couldn't survive as a company, because that market is not huge. It's big enough. And then obviously we started serving the hunting market, and that's also a tactical shift to expand our customer base. But then you go, okay, well, now you start getting into red dots and other sites that are related. You're kind of expanding into that more tactical, the plinking space, the markets that are kind of more law enforcement and military related, and then people who obviously like to, for lack of a better term, I guess, cosplay as tactical and law enforcement. That's still a valid market, right? So there's a lot of guys that will buy stuff because, hey, this is an issued rifle, and they'll try to replicate and try to be as real close to life as possible with all of the with all the kind of the real world stuff that all the special forces guys are using, with just the sniper guys are using, and the guys will build like replica sniper rifles from the 1960s and 1970s to this date, and they're still trying to hunt down the correct optic that goes on and paired with that, and the right paint job and the right bipod, and as historically close as possible, right? So there's such a huge gamut of users and like a wide swath of tastes. I think the Canadian user is resilient, for lack of a better term, will ultimately never be defeated by any law that the government can pass or any ban. If you try to take away every single SKS in possession in this country, you will the government will fall. Like, there is no way that this would happen. So, and the SKS has been dubbed the Canadian rifle, even though it's the furthest thing from Canada, right? It's so. So, and that's the thing. Like, we'll never make a product that really goes on an SKS, which is fine. But I'm sure somebody could adapt a pick rail or something to it with some bastardized version of it. But I don't know. It's such a hard question to answer. I think ultimately the Canadian gun owner will win no matter what, because but I feel so bad for every single one of my fellow gun owners and enthusiasts, because we're constantly being attacked. The list is ever shrinking, and for no good reason, just because they decided. They know better than us what's better for us and what we can spend our unfairly taxed hard-earned dollars on. And it's been decided that this is bad because it'll buy them some votes theoretically, but it won't. And until that day comes when the next government comes into power and rescinds and retracts all the attacks on this community, then we're still in the same position where we have to like JR and Phil are constantly battling against the bureaucracy of trying to figure out what can we make that complies with the laws as they're currently written and currently in place, and they're constantly playing catch up, right? And you're battling against an ever rising tide of, like I said, bureaucracy and paperwork and an administration that's trying to shut you down. So I don't know. I think we're going to be in a good spot come hopefully May or September, depending on when the next election is. I think it's kind of interesting, in contrast, being down here and talking to a bunch of the guys that we've been meeting with and talking to while we're down here. They're all very jazzed about Trump and Trump getting in, because he's talking about a national concealed carry mandate, right?
He's talking about concealed carry reciprocity.
Yeah, reciprocity across all 50 states, or maybe even 51. I don't know, but
they're promoting Puerto Rico.
Yeah, Puerto Rico's getting upgraded, or is American Samoa?
Could be Guam.
Yeah,
Everyone forgets about Guam.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely will be Guam. Yeah. Concealed carry, spam. 50
concealed carry reciprocity. I was like, that might be a good enough reason for Alberta to join as the 51st state. I don't know, but obviously it's a joke. But yeah, I mean, in contrast, like we're talking about ever diminishing rules and laws that are more onerous every day, and now they're talking about the thing that that should have been the thing from the very beginning. If you're talking about Second Amendment, right, and which is across all 50 states.
Can I tell you, I will not rest till I see somebody Bubba an Apex Edge onto a Soviet surplus SKS.
I may have a Bubba at SKS or not. So
With
we could probably satisfy that desire.
If you had one with an edge on it and you sent me a photograph, you would make my heart spin.
Okay,
don't even put on a rail on top. Use a barrel bolting clamp, so it's like right up front.
Before we move on, a couple of the guys wanted to know what you guys were drinking, Phil and JR. Who's going first here?
I'm going lightweight tonight, so just a Belveni 14-year Caribbean cask.
Oh, Caribbean cask is lovely.
Yeah,
that's nice.
What are you guys doing, Phil?
Brook Laddie, Islay single malt. We're going a little peaty tonight.
That's a nice one.
That's what we're drinking. 15-year-old.
That's pronounced Brook Laddie?
Brook Laddie.
That is definitely Scotch when it's spelled like that, but pronounced like that.
Just cop like.
Yeah. 15-year ball. Cool.
We 15-year-old. That's the one thing that Trudeau and I have in common.
Shots fired.
Only yours is in liquid form and his is friendship bracelet form.
Aw, yeah, Carly, you sent Van out with no whiskey tonight or no bourbon.
Well, she handed me a beer.
Okay, that's good.
But you're bourbon land.
Cheers.
She's just getting you She's getting you used to shot show where you can only get near beer.
Mm-hmm.
You guys, I feel so ghetto because I'm drinking Kirkland signatures.
Yeah. Before we change topics too far, I think I want to just talk as Phil and Daniel pointed out, Doc 57.
Mike's working.
I think when we talk about the resiliency of the Canadian gun owner, I think the one thing manufacturers in Canada or even stores in Canada have to remember is to never take the client base for granted either, though. Like they're tremendously supportive and they're willing to buy a new rifle just to support, like to help keep us alive.
Yep.
And that's wonderful. But I think we have to strive continuously to give them the best we possibly can at a cost-effective price point as well. And that's why I think Phil's done an amazing job of changing people's perception on Turkish, because there's Turkish and there's Turkish. And I think if now that I've done more business over there, I can really see the efforts, the serious singular efforts that Phil has had to do to get so many products to come into Canada that are actually consistently good. I'm having enough time just getting parts for one rifle, and he's got 30 rifles, and shotguns coming in. So, but I think we have to thank the Canadian gun owner. They've stood by us, and they're continuing to stand by us. But just make sure we don't take them for granted.
And they're growing in numbers.
Yeah.
In spite of all the shit that's being thrown at them, they're growing in numbers. Our CFO in Ontario finally had to admit that the number of legit gun owners can't be explained by, POLs changed to PALs and it's this and it's that. No, firearms ownership is increasing.
Absolutely, it is.
Genuinely is.
Yeah, absolutely, no question about that.
Well, I mean, JR, you guys do PAL courses, right?
Yep.
And have you seen a substantial decrease in numbers? No, right?
It's been tougher to fill the restricteds, but I think now that the Liberals are imploding, we'll be able to remind people that it takes 2-3 months to get a PAL. So let's start now. Start now.
Yeah.
So you can have a PAL when Polyam takes over, and you can have all the fun toys again.
And let me add to that without overstepping confidences, but a large number of people are saying, well, you know, when Polyev gets in, you know, he's going to do something, but he's not going to do everything. That's not this guy. And I've had the benefit of spending a fair amount of time with Pierre. And the questions I get from him he's not a gun guy, but he's one of the most intelligent, perceptive individuals on policy. And that translates to engineering and practical ways of looking at problems. He's one of the most perceptive guys to ask a question. You kind of sit there and go, okay, then I'm not dealing with the normal politician. This guy actually knows his shit, and he does. And he asked it from a very different way. So he is 100% committed to get rid of this mess that Justin has created, and that remains consistent. He's never wavered from that, to the extent that at the CPC convention, he detailed a guy, an MP, to speak to the session and say, hang on, no, we're not changing that policy. I campaigned on that policy as it's written. It's correct, and it is. It's the one we want as a community. This is a key plank in why I became leader. And he recognizes the massive number of votes that the Conservatives get from gun owners. And he knows that we show up. He couldn't know my name. And it's funny because Harper said the same thing. They both said, "You're the gun guy." Yeah, that would be me.
You're the gun guy.
You're the gun guy. And I mean, Harper got to the point. It was like, "Hey, gun guy, how's it going?" Right? I was policy chair to Gary Goodyear, so I showed up a few
Your
times.
name is one syllable. They couldn't remember one syllable.
I mean, you got to remember, this guy meets thousands of people,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Pierre is in the same boat. He meets thousands of people.
Yeah.
The fact that he remembers me and my issue,
Just at
and
all.
the fact that I've helped it, frick, that's awesome. Because most guys, if they're going to remember somebody for our issue, it isn't positive. And both of these guys are very positive about that. I mean, I got an apology from Harper as to that they couldn't do more. And I know why he couldn't do more. And he was boxed into a situation by people who needed to be burned at the stake. And in the following election, they were. I think Pierre is going to have a very large majority. I think he's going to have a wonderful group of people that he can select from. We've got amazing MPs. I sure as hell hope all you guys got your 31st of December checks out and started writing them to people, because they remember. And have your group of MPs you talk to. I have about 9 that I write checks to every year, and get to know these people. And like I said, Pierre knows our issue, and he knows it really, really well. For a non-gun guy, he knows it exceptionally well. And there's a couple of little fun things I keep prodding them about. I think firearms should be under heritage. Why is the control of a legal product under the criminal code?
Yeah,
I think we're a heritage aspect. And I think we should
or at least parts.
I think we should be represented under heritage with all those other good sports.
Yeah.
And,
My firearms identify as a national park, protected.
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
We are more represented by heritage than we sure as hell ever are by the Solicitor General or the Attorney General. By far, we're not criminals. And
I
they
guess if
know
you look at it from the perspective of like, okay, the legal use of firearms can be controlled by or represented by heritage, right? And then the illegal use of
Absolutely,
firearms
as it
is
should
still
be.
under the criminal code, right? Which is the same thing as the legal use of a hockey stick and the illegal use of a hockey stick, right?
Or a car.
and
I think
that
that's
pulls
probably
away
analogy.
that pulls away the basic premise which the liberals pulled in 95, which was to make the pure ownership of an article illegal unless you have a permission slip from the government. And that's the huge thing. Sorry. What is gentleman's asking about heritage? Heritage. We have a heritage ministry. We have a number of ministries in Ottawa, but heritage is one of them, and it looks after basically all the old stuff. But heritage should bring in parks. What we do with sports, like that's a huge heritage thing. Fishing, conservation. Like there's a number of areas which the federal government has some degree of overriding participation in. And they really go into, you want to ask, what is a Canadian? Well, your heritage ministry should be, that's what a Canadian is. You look at what's under there, what they support, how they help. That's your heritage. Canadians are gun owners. We're legal gun owners. We've been hunters for years. We're fishermen. We're parks. We're sports people. We remember our past. We know Vimy Ridge. We know all of the things that went into making Canada a country, and that's those aspects come under heritage. And I think that firearms should be under heritage, because we are. You look at the history of firearms that have been in this country. Absolutely, collectors. It's a heritage activity, and that's exactly what
I agree, Phil. There's no reason why the chief registrar for firearms is the chief of the RCMP. Like it's ridiculous. Like whoever's in charge of the firearms file, the chief registrar, the farm, should be in heritage, and it should be a different department. It should not be under the RCMP.
And that fundamentally changes the view, because with firearms under the RCMP, you're immediately associated with, guess what? Criminals. How many criminals do I see on this screen? 0. And every one of us has been checked out every single night. And we joke around with that, but it's a fundamental perception which has been pulled over on the Canadian public as a whole by shoving us in with the criminal code. And we shouldn't be. We're a heritage activity.
Right?
Oh, there's no question that it's purposeful. Absolutely.
But it can be purposely undone. And I think that the control of firearms should go down to the provinces because they're property.
What's interesting about that, Phil, is in my life there are two big parts of my life that are handled under the criminal code that really shouldn't be. And you're absolutely right. The first is guns, and the second, believe it or not, is combat sports. They're actually
100%.
They're handled under the criminal code the exact same way that guns are, and as a result of that, since 2015, in the province of Saskatchewan, stand-up striking combat sports, other than boxing because it's an Olympic sport, have been banned under amateur competition in this province. There's no kickboxing, there's no Muay Thai, there's no amateur MMA, there's no full contact karate, nothing. It's all illegal because it's governed under the criminal code.
And that's
is it, Chris, because you are the most weapon?
Because I'm the most lethal weapon? Is that what you said?
Just because you got an extra spinal digit there
You really, you do a good job of remembering my complaints, Phil.
Yeah, that's caught more than a few people in the past.
Yeah.
That's another story.
Hey, can I bring us back to Pierre Polyev just for a quick second? Because I want to get you guys' opinion on this, and maybe everybody's quick opinion on this. Here's why I think that Polyev is going to have a lot less kickback in doing away with a lot of the gun garbage and even redoing a lot of our gun laws than perhaps people like Harper did. And not just because Harper had two minorities before he ever had a majority, and Pierre's likely to start out with a majority, but I think it's because he's finally hit on the right formula. And that formula is that everybody in this country is agreeing on the crime problem. And he is, I think, very intelligently tying in the crime reform with gun reform. And what he's saying is all of the gun stuff, all of the gun bans, they're Grandpa Joe's firearm. You're targeting the wrong people. Stop targeting the wrong people. Start targeting the criminals. Let's fix the criminal, the way that we deal with criminals in this country. And part of how we are going to deal with criminals in this country is we're going to undo the garbage gun bans that were a red herring under the Liberal government. And I think that that's going to, reduce the amount of resistance to doing away with all of the gun garbage that we've seen over the last 10 years. But two, A and B, it's also going to, I think, create some hard and fast evidence for the things that we have been saying all along, because he's really just picked up on our message, which is banning guns is not making people safer. It has no effect on crime. And if he uses that message to make these changes and all of the gun ban stuff goes away and he affects actual crime, we will start to see the evidence for what we've been saying all along, and people have been calling us for a shit.
Yeah, we've been basically in a multi-year experiment with data and results of the legislation that the Liberals have brought in.
Yep.
And it's simply resulted in an increase in crime because we have criminals on the streets that shouldn't be there. And we have legal firearms users that are still legal firearms users. It's unfortunately it's not rocket science, but that's they've proved our point by conducting an experiment. So,
and it carves
kind of
down
funny you said that proving point,
Eric, because it carves down onto what is being used. You know, we still, the safest firearm in the country is the AR-15.
Yeah.
You know, we should give every criminal an AR-15 because they apparently don't appear in crime. You know, I jest, but only partially. You're 100% correct that we have conducted, and realistically, with the origin of the prohib classes in 92, they actually go back to 79, but the biggest one is started in 92 and 95, and none of them have shown up in crimes.
Yeah.
Like literally none of them.
Yeah.
So it sets up, you're right, it sets up a phenomenal database to prove that clearly we're not the problem. And if you have a conversation, and you know, I live in Ontario, so I get to have these conversations, and you talk to moms at a volleyball game, because my daughter plays in Humber, which is in a not necessarily the nicest part of Toronto in some of their campuses. Some of their campuses are in gorgeous parts of Toronto, but the moms are like, you know, this is terrible. Nobody should have these. I said, well, okay, here, let's think about this. We only got so much money to go around. And we do, as much as, you know, Justin will print as much as he can. We look at this problem and say, okay, how many cops are employed in Toronto, and all they're doing is chasing people who are law-abiding?
Yeah.
I mean, how much good is this doing? Well, that's not the point. Okay, the number
That's the point.
somewhere north of 200 police officers in Toronto are involved on various task forces, secondments, etc., to monitoring legal, law-abiding people. And I said to them, I said, what would you rather have? Somebody looking at my file every night to say, oh yeah, Mr. Odell didn't do anything again. Or would you have 200 cops on your streets patrolling, protecting your kids? All of a sudden it's like, how many cops? Yeah, they don't get the numbers, and the budget numbers, you know, and this goes back to taking guns out of the RCMP, shove them into heritage, you know, as a nice heritage activity, and all of a sudden we've got probably 1,000 or more police officers in the RCMP and just in Ontario and Quebec. Throw in New Brunswick with all of the people that are attached there, that are now able to actually go out and chase real criminals.
It's a hidden bureaucracy, right?
It's not even hidden. It's massive.
Well, from most people's view, right?
From that perspective, yes. But in the same way that, you know, when Trump talks about the deep state, it's not hidden. It just happens to be concentrated in Washington, and they don't talk about it with anybody that's not from Washington. You know, there's hundreds of thousands, if not a couple of million people involved in that in DC. We're fortunately not quite that big. But we have hundreds of thousands of people involved in government in Ottawa, and a lot of them, realistically, aren't doing anything to benefit the country. And we're our little segment of it, which has got hundreds, if not a couple of thousand. It's going crazy. Yeah, Mitch, yeah, 1,000, yes. And when you talk about them, I mean, every firearms transfer still goes to the provinces. Even though it's business to business. It's a freaking business. I want to send JR a gun. Why in the hell do they even care? JR is licensed. I'm licensed. But you know what? At least 4 or 5 police officers see every transfer. At least. And I know this because I trip over them. And I make a point of figuring out who's reviewing what at what level. The amount of money that's spent, that's wasted, is insane. Absolutely.
I think, like I've thought for a long time that ultimately, because the Conservatives will win a huge majority in the next election, but eventually they'll lose an election, and the Liberals will probably win because it's hard to imagine the NDP getting anywhere these days. And I think that the best thing we can hope for is some serious reforms with regards to regulation in general, such that they allow for basically the complete dismantling of that internal bureaucracy that Phil's referencing. Because going back to, because I was just recently reading through the role of the registrar and the origins of the firearms reference table as a document. I mean, to put it, I don't think, like, a lot of people, we just accept the FRT as a thing, even gun owners. Like, normal people don't know this exists, but gun owners go like, oh, yeah. But
Murray Smith is the enemy of gun owners in Canada.
But even beyond Murray, he is, but beyond Murray Smith, the very fact that in global terms, the FRT is probably, and by probably, I mean, I'm about 99% sure, the most comprehensive reference document for the identification of firearms in existence in the world.
Oh, the fact that James has been trying to get license on it for at least 20 years. You're 100%
and that tells
correct.
You how complicated our system is. That we need to maintain the most complicated and convoluted, comprehensive record of every gun in existence to maintain our regulatory framework is insane. Like, that's the opposite of efficiency. To say, hey, you know, we've got these laws and the only way to maintain them is to keep this ridiculous, like something that exceeds national security intelligence documents in the States in terms of complexity, just to maintain who can own what gun. Like, this is, and we're only talking about guns that are licensed, because I mean, the firearms reference table, you go back to the original days, it was just so that the verifiers could identify a gun when they registered it to you, because of course the long guns were registered at the time. and it's grown into this friggin' behemoth, and it's a testament or a totem for how the entire system has gone from, quasi reasonable FAC, simple, small, like the FRT was originally started up by 15 people. That was the staff. Now it's like, God, how many technicians work for the RCMP to maintain a document that has how many pages? Like it's
even 15
insane.
people.
I think they've crossed 200,000 base records now.
It's and when it comes to this sort of stuff, they're not legal documents, as we all know. It's the RCMP's opinion, but they still have a responsibility to maintain those records, the security around them. You think about the information security. I mean, as a licensed product of the government, they release it now, but prior to that, you couldn't get a copy of it. It was maintained under like top secret level stuff. It's cascading down from this ridiculous, we need to have all this stuff. And honestly, it feels like your standard, I hate to say it, but like your standard liberal style policy of like just shovel money into the government. It's insane. And I think if we can get a reform that allows for that dismantling, like simplified classification system, for example, where, the determination on classes, if we even have classes, because even better than that would be to not have classes of firearms, just have a license. You want to keep a license, great. You get a license, you can go get a gun. We don't really care what it is, because to be honest, if I'm in a room with someone and they have a gun, I don't care if it's a handgun, an M240, or Ruger 1022. If they're a good person, I'm going to leave the room with the same amount of holes my body currently has. If they're not, I don't really care what they've got. I don't want to go in the room with them. Yeah. So this notion of being, a system where we control the people and we control what the people can own is just patently absurd. It's not like, we do have different classes of license, because driving a class 1 air brake truck is a whole different process than driving a minivan. Mm-hmm. But when you get a passenger car license, it's not like they go, okay, you don't have your Corvette endorsement yet, so you're just going to have to stick to the Honda Civic, sir. I'm sorry. It's just, it's bizarre. And I do hope that, as a gun owner and someone's watched this stuff, and a lot of gun owners are probably, I would rather just see like, hey, the simplified classification system would be awesome. If we get that, that'd be great. But I kind of hope they go a step further and just go, no, you know what? Let's just get rid of this whole class thing, because now we don't have to have technologists. We can delete the FRT entirely. Just keep it simple, the old Colin Chapman from Lotus Cars, design it, then add lightness. Take a look at what you've got and then figure out what you could possibly cut. They always say that good design, when it comes to graphic design and stuff, good writing is what's left over when you take everything else away. That's what good policy should be too. It should be the absolute bare minimum that accomplishes the goals at the most efficient level for the taxpayer. And I think if Polyev can pursue that, then I don't think we would see a TikTok back from not TikTok, the Chinese social media network, but rather the TikTok on policy of going back to a more regulatory standpoint. Because once this system's dismantled, for example, what Harper did with the registry and getting rid of that is why so many of gun owners, maybe me, maybe not, can keep the guns that were prohibited that they don't know about, for lack of a better term. If we get rid of the FRT and we can delete those records, they'll have a very difficult time coming back to a system where they can piecemeal ban stuff. I know there's lots of people saying, well, they should get rid of the OIC because it's just a stupid way that they shouldn't be able to do OICs. The government's always going to be able to do OICs because they need to do things like change translations in laws and not have it waste the legislature's time. So they're going to have OICs. We should be looking at other ways where they can just say, hey, we don't have a record table. We don't have classes. So we can't really ban guns in Canada anymore because we've only got these two simple, really defined things of it's a handgun, it's a rifle because you need to use two hands, whatever. Just keep it simple like that and just cut the rest of the crap out.
So I guess what's the beyond the simplified classification system, but how do we idiot proof the future, for lack of a better term?
Oh, that's a tall order, Ben.
But as far as goddamn idiots, regulations, right, and laws go, how do you do that so that it can be undone by the next majority of either NDP or whoever, right, or liberal?
Well, it seems to me that that's the double-edged sword of a democracy, isn't
it? One round per trigger pull, 2 rounds per trigger pull.
Your biggest defense is what we've all been talking about in different ways, and that's distribution of the government. Instead of concentration of the government, you distribute it, and in as much as possible, you eliminate. So you get rid of these things, and then you distribute functions out to areas where it becomes particularly difficult and particularly onerous to try and get them back. The long gun right, they've done their best to force businesses to create a mini registry for long guns, and businesses are forced to do it. So we have that, but it's distributed. And every time somebody comes in and says, we need the information on this particular serial number, and I say, do you have a judicial document giving you permission to get that? Most of them I don't hear from again. And, but under the Privacy Act, yes, I am required to keep a certain amount of information. But there's very little to no information and authorization that tells you who you can give it to. So unless somebody's got a warrant, I don't give them information.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it's not happening. And that becomes like you can pass the bureaucraties right back to them. In some cases, it's important, and there are occasions when I will get an actual officer will come back and they'll be like, "We're actually working on something really important here," and they will make it clear, abundantly clear that if it's a real case, if it's just a found in, oh yeah, we got this. Yeah, sorry, no, you've got a gun. That's all you need to know.
I think we could probably future-proof it too by directly going to ask the question of what would the Liberals hate to see? Well, they'd probably hate to see the FRT dismantled. They'd hate to see the firearms program defunded in a significant manner. They'd hate to see a lot of the regulations removed to make things easier, because in a lot of ways, making these laws more enforceable is a good, strong move for law enforcement support. So they'd probably hate to see that. But I think what they'd hate to see the most is both concealed carry, and I've always maintained that could be coming to Canada based on crime trends. And once you give people the right to defend themselves with a firearm on their person that they can take where they're going, it becomes very, even if it's not codified in law, that becomes a very inalienable right very quickly, because people don't want to be stripped of it. Once they have that ability, they don't want it taken away. And the second thing would be, and this is another thing that I hope Polyev does, as we've discussed, we've got more gun owners than ever before. The second they get rid of these bans, there's going to be an explosion in people taking their courses. Make that easier to do. Don't necessarily have to make it less restrictive. If they want to keep all of the various reference checks, I mean, some of the C-21 stuff is insane, saying basically that they can do a background check in perpetuity is ridiculous. You bring back the 5-year limit window, whatever, reduce the cost of it, perhaps fund it through Heritage. I mean, Heritage funds all the CanCon stuff. Whenever you see, we used to get funding through Canada Heritage for magazines, because they fund publishing, videos, TV shows like Due South and stuff. When the show ends and it goes, supported by the government of Canada, that's Heritage. Maybe we spend some of that money on subsidizing gun licenses, because it is a Canadian heritage and we want people to be able to experience that and get there.
Why doesn't Heritage fund us?
We also need to modernize the courses.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I've had that conversation in Ottawa numerous times. The date stamp on the current course is 2014. So it's now been 11 years. C-71's not there. C-21's not there. The OICs aren't in there. There's so many mistakes in that stupid document, the course. And we keep saying, well, why can't we do half of it online? Like, okay, you want people to come in and handle. You want people come in and test. But why can't you do all the bullshit about
book stuff,
firearm safety, like the history, like the fucking, like, you want people to learn, act, and prove, great, but you want them, do they have to spend 4 hours with you to teach them about blunderbusses? Only Phil needs to know about blunderbusses. So we can cover all that stuff.
You're not wrong.
So we could there's all kinds of things we could do to make it easier, because now to get your PAL course in Ontario, I guess it just went up to $450 for the combined course.
Oh,
so
wow.
So it's almost $500 to get your course, to get your PAL. And it's run by a cabal called the FSESO, which is the most
Firearms Safety Council of Ontario.
Right, but they are it's the most old boys club organization going. So
it's populated by people of a very particular past background.
Yeah, and they control it because they all make six figures running their courses, right? So for them, it's business, and it's big business.
They don't want competition.
They don't want competition. And
Is that why I keep getting turned down to teach the course?
in Ontario or in Saskatchewan?
In Saskatchewan.
Well, they just
I
don't
think
like
it's
you.
something that happens everywhere because BC does the same thing. It's if you're in a certain area like in Kelowna, they don't want to have 30 examiners in Kelowna, so they limit it all to.
I keep getting told that they have.
It basically.
Well, good thing in Alberta. So I've had lots of chats with them here, and the CFO's office is basically why do you limit the number of instructors? The free market will look after itself.
Absolutely.
So if they and also too, just because people get their instructor status doesn't mean they're instructing still. Like I'm probably one of the oldest instructors still instructing. Like my number is 51. And so yeah, like,
that's old, JR.
Yeah. I think Steve's is like 1,175 or something in Alberta. Like, but let's guess how many people that in the first 200 or 300 PAL course instructors are still instructing. But
probably not very many.
Right, and they're still in the books as instructors. So they say, well, there's 30 guys, or there's 200 instructors in Calgary that are certified. Well, there may be only 30 guys that are actually doing it.
They're only removed from the list when they're dead.
Yeah.
And I don't say that tritely. That's literally the case. You're only removed from the instructor list when you're dead.
Yeah. So there's lots of ways. There's lots of ways we can make this program better. I think we're going to see a huge shift the moment we get the reins away from the Liberal government and we get new members of Parliament as cabinet ministers, new Solicitor Generals, things like that. I think the changes will be fast and they'll be furious. It's not going to be like under the Harper time where Harper wanted to sit back for the first couple of years and kind of see how things went because he's very pragmatic. Poilievre's going to come in there and he's going to have, let's say, if he only gets 200 members of Parliament, well, he's only got how many cabinet ministers? Like, is there 40? How many ministries are there?
It varies from the high 20s to the low 40s based on
right. So let's just say 40. So he's going to have 160 members of Parliament, and he's going to need something to do with them. So besides getting all the committees going to start digging up all the shit on the we and the Huan and the Chinese and like all that bullshit.
Green slush fund.
Yeah, he's going to still have really strong, smart, articulate members of Parliament to help work on, say, the firearms file. Right. I think it's going to be fast and furious. They're going to be given jobs with deliverables, and they're going to attack it. And they're going to tap stakeholders like us to get in there and help them attack it.
Interesting. Well, and we're one of those rare issues that they could be doing. They could be fixing it now. Like there's with a lot of the other stuff, the green slush fund, the current state of our economy, the potential for a trade war going on. These are rising issues that have come up. The issues around the Firearms Act have existed since the Harper years. So there's nothing stopping the Conservative Party from having a turnkey solution. And I've heard that that's sort of what they have now, is they sort of already know what they're going to do. So it should just be a pretty quick, let's make sure this plan still works. Done is what I would obviously love to see.
I don't think we're going to see something fairly close to that. There's all kinds of great conversation happening.
One thing I'd like to see is that they start with, like, we have the antique status, which I think is like 1894 or something around there. I'd like to have that added in somewhere where, like, after so many years, the cutoff year gets bumped up. So, like, right now we should be on 1912 because we're in 2020 or something.
You just want the 1911.
A lot of that was determined. A lot of that came from the actual cartridges. And, which is why one of the things you'll never see antique is a 22 long rifle.
No.
It could be from 1860, but it's a 22 long rifle. Yeah, congratulations. It's still a restricted firearm.
I'm just thinking about the long game.
Oh, I completely agree with you. But I mean, I go back to what Dan said. Why do we even have that clause? Let's look at it from a more pragmatic perspective, what good has any of this stuff done? None. Nothing has. This whole mess has never helped solve a crime.
No.
I mean,
Well, I
Dan,
guess-
was it Mendocino? I can't remember. Was talking about the long gun registry found Lapine, aka Gamil Garbi. Well, and Dan spoke up and said, "Hang on, no, he capped himself at the scene." Well, shit. You know, the long gun registry, as far as I know, and I have been fairly involved in it. Sorry, the firearms registry as a whole has never solved a crime. The greatest thing it's ever actually done has led to somebody's found property being returned to them. Okay.
Well, it's also created a lot of crimes. Let's not forget that, because there's been, like, instead of solving crimes where someone has actually been harmed, the FRT, the classification system, and all of this has just created more crimes. Like,
crime.
You took an AR-15 to the range last week? Oh, well, that's a crime now, so we're going to have to send the RCMP to your door to knock on it. Even though no one was harmed, there was no injured party involved. Now we got to start this whole process of an investigation. Let's see your AR-15. Where have you been stored? Oh, it's not stored in compliance with the prohibited regulations. That's a second crime. And it is a contribution to crime. It is not a tool to prevent it. It's insane.
That's an interesting thought. That's how that would make a pretty big difference in those statistics that Polyev wants to bring down.
Yeah.
You know,
we know from statistics, right? You guys are talking about all these different, OICs and the rules that have been put into place. But one of the things that was promised to us when Justin Trudeau and his Liberals won their first government in 2015 was what? That they're going to bring in evidence-based policy, right? Now, that may have been the case in their minds. In all reality, when it came to the environment, which was a very big, selling point that they had for getting elected, the younger generation caring about quote unquote climate change and global warming and the pollution of our waters and plastics and this and that, the gamut of the problems that the world is facing, seemingly. They promised that they're going to solve all that with, evidence-based policies that Canada is going to contribute. However, when it came to the firearms file, there was no evidence that was ever supplied as to why they instituted the OIC or why they did C-21. And every time the pro-firearms side or the lobby or the experts that were brought in to testify at the various committee levels, every time they came forward with evidence as to why they shouldn't do this, it was ignored.
Yeah.
So I know it's kind of, stating the obvious here to the kind of the community that knows all this stuff, but at what point do we need more evidence? I don't think the last 10 years or what, of Justin Trudeau's Liberal rule has given us any more evidence. It's just kind of added to the data set. But the evidence has always been very, very clear that the Canadian firearm owner who is legally vetted, trained, and constantly monitored is the safest, most trusted citizen of this country, more so than police officers, more so than a lot of other members of parliament, let's say, and statistically speaking, is the safest Canadian. So how many times can you say that without screaming into the wind, right?
Yeah. We should be getting tax
breaks. About a group of about 4 million people, 5 million people, and it is the largest and safest identifiable group that you can get. It's the safest identifiable group in terms of law-abiding citizens.
Yep.
More than clergy, teachers, cops, any identifiable group you can pick. Firearms owners, and that's 4+ million people.
And that's
statistically the safest group out there.
The automated criminal record check that we get every single morning, let alone all of the stipulations and laws that we follow voluntarily to be able to keep our guns. Although I will say, Van, you were talking about the evidence-based policy in regards to the gun file. I mean, they were promising that with everything, and never did follow through on that. Even look at what a lot of people thought was a great thing was the legalization of marijuana. There was no real evidence-based policy behind that either, because if they're following evidence-based policy, the reason for legalizing marijuana is essentially the same argument for reducing gun control. You know what I mean? Like when you criminalize something that shouldn't be criminalized, you push it into the underground. It becomes a criminal behavior, which leads to more criminal behavior, which leads to things like black markets and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. So, I mean, if they were following any sort of evidence-based policy, there would have been more consistency in policies. Their promise
and they'd be defendable.
Real is that piano over your right shoulder right now.
Well, if they had evidence-based and science-based policies, then we'd defend them. You could disagree with them, but you could actually have a logical conversation about them.
Yeah,
exactly.
But we can't.
Yeah,
right. But that's been the way. Firearms rules and laws have always been knee-jerk, non-logic based, reactionary.
Emotion-driven.
They're emotion-based responses. Because if you were to look at it logically, I mean, remember the first mission of a politician is to get elected. So why did they legalize marijuana? Well, make it 18, 19 years old, whatever the hell it is. Doesn't matter to me because I'm way older than that. Is because there's the voters. Yeah. Because there's the actual evidence shows clearly that marijuana usage affects brain development up to the age of about 25. So if you were going to legalize marijuana based on evidence, you would actually legalize marijuana for basically 25-year-olds and older.
Yeah.
Because prior to that, it's shown demonstrable, scientific, clear evidence that it inhibits brain development.
Well, and never mind that it's a trigger for people who are genetically predisposed to things like schizophrenia. Like there's if we're looking at evidence, we should look at evidence.
Yeah, it's been an interesting conversation getting back to the gun file on certain things, because I mean JR probably has had this discussion, I'm going to bet Dan probably has in his conversations with political people in Ottawa. I know I've had this conversation, and issues will come up, and let's pick an easy magazine capacity limits, and I'm like, why do we have those? Oh, I don't know if we're going to be able to get back magazines. I'm like, okay, you guys said right from the get-go this was going to be evidence-based.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, show me the evidence where this has actually had an impact in reducing crime.
Yep.
The sounds of silence.
Yeah.
Same thing with
and I know because it's never been used.
Suppressors.
Yeah.
Suppressors are another one. I mean, that's going to be a health and somebody's going to bring that up as a health and safety issue. And they should, because it is a health and safety issue, certainly amongst law enforcement and military. But that also applies in ranges. JR's got how many range officers work for you at Target and formerly at the shooting edge. And these people eventually are going to suffer permanent hearing damage. And as an employer, you're responsible. Suppressors are a health and safety thing.
Well, you can't. So I've got stores in the UK, and we sell a lot of stocking hunting rifles. We can't sell one without a moderator on it. Like nobody will buy one if it's not threaded, and often if it doesn't come with one. Like if I want to make a deal for a rifle, a very inexpensive rifle, it's gonna have to come with a moderator on it.
That's the trick. We're calling it the wrong thing.
Yeah.
They don't call it suppressors. They're moderators.
We should all have standard capacity magazines with moderators on our modern sporting rifles.
Mufflers.
Right.
For hunting.
Yes.
Gun mufflers.
Well, the first time I went,
Maxim Muffler Company.
they're awesome. Like when you go going hunting with a moderator on your rifle, it's a thing of beauty. You don't have to wear any ear defenders. You can actually listen to what's going on around you. I remember when I was walking out and I was going to put my ear defenders on, and they're like, "What are those for? Like, what do you got?" Like, it's like, "Well, we're going hunting." It's like, "Yeah, well, rifles are all moderated, so get rid of those things, geek." And it's great. I think it's wonderful. We should all have them.
I compete. I've shot matches in the States for PRS centerfire quite a few times here, and I'd say probably 50 to 60% of the competitors shoot suppressed. And now, so much so that the PRS has an official rule for 2025 where they've created a suppressor category. So you can, for the guys who compete suppressed, and they can have their own trophy, versus the guys who don't and whatever. But it's a huge part of the sport down here. And even they have the NFA tax and all the stuff that goes with it. Apparently, it's gotten a lot better and faster. They still have to pay that couple $100 fee for it, whatever. But it's a tax at the end of the day. But I don't see any reason why we can't have them up there in Canada, and why we can't have them for use in sporting, for hunting, and just general range use. Because like you guys said, how many ranges have been shut down or have been attempted to get shut down in Canada across the country, where encroachment is an issue by municipalities and boroughs that are ever expanding, and they get into the vicinity of a range that's been there for 30, 40 years, and they've never had an issue, but all of a sudden now there's the NIMBY factor coming into play. So there's
outdoor ranges in France, like in Paris, and you can't be a member unless your guns are moderated.
And that's my knee-jerk concern. I mean, obviously, I want suppressors. My concern, because I hear a lot of people often say, like, well, think about how many ranges wouldn't be facing sound issues with neighbors and whatnot. I mean, a range here in Kelowna, the downtown range here in Kelowna, they're in a continuous fight with a former police detective who moved next door and hates the sound of gunfire. That could very easily open the door to, you must shoot suppressed. And suppressors are not the cheapest of things because of their incredibly controlled nature in the States. And that would end up being a thing that again might raise the barrier to entry.
But Daniel, I think if we're talking about suppressors, it's not like the US, then the prices are so much cheaper coming out of Europe. I mean, we sell rimfire suppressors that are literally $30. They shoot them till you shoot them till they don't work anymore. You screw it off, you throw it away, put a new one on. Like the only reason the States they're so expensive is because of that $200 tax stamp. Every suppressor in the States is almost made to mil spec standards to last for tens of thousands of semi-automatic or fully automatic fire. In Europe, they're designed around hunting guns, like rimfire or semi-auto only, like because they don't have full autos, so they can be semi-auto rated, and they last, and they're cheap. So you have to not look the same at what the prices are in the U.S. I could probably have a whole lineup of hunting and semi-automatic sport moderators for every gun in Canada, and you could probably do it with not exceeding $500 a can if you wanted to.
I mean, once anything like that gets legalized, the market will sort it out very, very quickly.
Yeah,
and I mean, you don't even need to be as caliber specific. I mean, you got a 5.56 and a 30 caliber can, and that covers everything in between.
Yeah, but you can make them because we're dealing with semi-automatic.
Yeah. You can make them much simpler.
Yeah, and
material issues.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I mean, a massive amount of the technology in the U.S. suppressor industry is related to back pressure and back gassing on fully automatic firearms.
Yeah.
And not affecting mount, harmonics, all kinds of things like that. None of that applies with a single shot or a semi-automatic. So an excellent functional design is massively simple compared to some of the designs we're seeing out of the US from like Radical or OSS, people like that are making amazingly great pieces of kit, but they're made to function on a fully automatic firearm that is in a funky mount that has high harmonic issues, that on a gun that may be a little more sensitive to back pressure. JR, you're absolutely correct. You could factor close to an order of magnitude out of the cost of a unit just because you're not worrying about any of that stuff.
Yeah. So but I hear you saying, Daniel, we don't want it to become mandatory and then add one more entry to barrier to entry. Because again, we make it more and more difficult for people who don't want to, or like the hunter that literally shoots 3 rounds a year. They fire 2 rounds to make sure their zero on their rifle is good, and their third round that year is taking down that deer, and that's it. The other gun gets cleaned and put away until next year. For the next 3 rounds, they'll fire next year. They don't care about the suppressor or moderating because they're firing 1 round in the field, and they make it count.
We're getting a little over 2.25 hours here, but I'd like to push us towards one more topic if I can before we're done for the night. And a little bit of this conversation has been happening in the chat over the last couple of minutes, but a couple of people talking about magazine capacity limits, and obviously, probably not a surprise. A lot of people do not agree with any sort of magazine capacity limits. We've actually had some people saying that, yeah, actually, I'm kind of in favor of some magazine capacity limits for one reason or for another reason. I've always kind of thought, has there ever been anyone in history when they find themselves in the middle of a mass shooting saying, now, is this a 17-round Glock or a 10-round Glock? I don't know if that actually has ever happened. I also remember seeing a video from the US quite a long time ago, and I kind of did this experiment on my own and kind of found similar results. But it was like, does magazine capacity limits actually make a difference? And what they did is they basically took somebody with standard, I think they were 25-round magazines, and they were blasted with an AR-15. And obviously, we're talking about uninterrupted fire here, and that's really what people are concerned about, is they think that if somebody has to reload more often, then there's a greater chance of the shooting to be interrupted by people who don't also have firearms. And so you've got your standard, let's say 25 rounds, that's your uninterrupted shooting. Then you've got your 5-round magazine capacity. And so obviously, you're changing magazines, what is that, 4 times, 5 times math, compared to every 1 magazine change with a standard capacity magazine. And so what they did to test this is they took the shooter with their magazines, and every time the shooter stopped shooting to switch a magazine, they had somebody sprint at them from the side, obviously not from the front. I think they did from 20 meters away. And if the person was able to touch the shooter before they were able to change their magazine and continue firing, then that was considered that they tackled the shooter. The shooting has been interrupted, and that was kind of how they tested this. But if you aren't able to touch the guy before the magazine change, before they start shooting again, then obviously the idea here is that you made it to within a couple of feet. You didn't quite make it far enough. And you end up with the same situation that we saw. I don't know if any of you guys ever watched the video of the Christchurch massacre, but at one point there was a guy who waited for him to reload while he was standing in the front foyer of the church, and he came around the corner and tried sprinting at him to tackle him while he was changing magazines. And the guy got to within about 4 feet of him, but he changed the magazine and he shot the guy down when he was about 4 feet from reaching him. And this video found the exact same thing. You can get within a couple of feet of the guy, but every single time the guy's able to change the magazine quick enough. And they did it with experienced people shooting and not experienced people shooting. And they just couldn't get to the guy with any semblance of reliability. I kind of did my own little testing with this, and I kind of found the exact same thing. So the question becomes, do magazines? What are your guys' thoughts on all of this, and why or why not?
Red herring. 100% red herring. Like magazine capacity, we shouldn't even worry about it. It is what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Congratulations. Buddy brings in a belt fed.
Yeah. Fair point.
It is exactly what JR said. It's a red herring. You either believe that individuals like ourselves are, the general public are trustworthy. Realistically, go ahead, sprint at a guy with a 5-round magazine. He's still got 5 rounds. Ain't going to be a fun day. You know, this is one of those cases of, you know, the second mouse gets the cheese. You hope somebody runs out in front of you and you run behind them, and, you know, while they're getting shot, you maybe can do something. It's such a spurious discussion, and JR is right. It's a complete and utter red herring. You either believe that people like us are responsible adults, or you're a liberal.
I'm liberal, though.
Concise.
I think, like, I mean, it's not going to be surprised that I agree with everyone here, but, like, the things I'd bring up is, A, we're once more using extreme outlier events that are predicated, like these mass shootings they're extremely rare, first of all, both in Canada and the States. These are not common crimes anywhere in the world. B, the amount of premeditation that goes into that specific crime is tremendous. These are not, I'm going to go home, get a gun, and then come back and shoot a bunch of people. These people are planning these things out. They write manifestos more often than not. That's how much planning they put into it. So the notion that they're not going to be able to obtain or make an illegal magazine in the age of 3D printing is laughable as well. So it's simply not realistic in 2025. But also, too, if you want to have evidence-based legislation like we talked about, if we're going to talk about, okay, we have to have a conversation for some stupid reason about mass shootings and how to prevent them because they never happened in the first place, basically, how to prevent them? Well, okay, the way to prevent them is by getting people to carry a gun. Because how do most mass shootings end? The shooter is shot. Elijah Dickin did it across a mall or food court. Like, that is the only, like, running at a guy, because we need to have magazine capacity limits so that you can charge the shooter while he changes mags. A bullet goes faster than I can. That would be a lot more effective.
We're not the Soviet Union. We don't send meat at wave after wave. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
You get the gun. You get the ammo.
Overwhelming. Like, just
to Dan's point, and he makes a critical point. The planning that goes in. I forget what state it was, but you remember the theater shooter? He was a few years ago. He had
Colorado.
He went from his house. He selected the theater he was going to because it was the first theater that didn't allow firearms to be carried in the theater. And I forget the number. It was like 9 or 13 theaters he passed to get to the one where he actually did his crime.
The gun-free
There's
zone.
a tremendous amount of planning goes into these things. And if you're planning, I don't give a crap what you want to throw at it. Somebody that wants to plan something, they're gonna figure out a way to do something.
Well, a testament to that is
Dan is also correct. The best way to solve that issue is a good guy with a gun.
And you look at countries that have banned guns in response to mass shootings, like Australia, whoever would likes to hold up and say, oh, they did it, and look, there was never a mass shooting afterwards. A, they had mass shootings afterwards. There are still mass shootings in Australia occasionally. B, the mass murderers just switched to arson. They started chaining doors shut and lighting buildings on fire, which, like, you know, again, the premeditation that goes into this stuff, the amount of information that's available on the internet now, especially, you don't have to be that creative if you want to get something like this done, if you want to be one of these people. And all of the stuff that we've discussed tonight, the magazine capacity regulations, well, there's a bunch of politicians and bureaucrats and police officers that need to inspect the shipments of magazines and onerous crap that goes on that reduces the amount of capital available to catch the people looking on the internet to try and find ways to kill the most amount of people they can. That's the reality of it. And that's where, you know, you want to stop mass shootings? I'm not kidding. Just grant CCW, because the mass shootings always happen in gun-free zones. That one with Elijah in the mall, that was a gun-free mall. It's always the case because they never want someone that shoots back. It's why it's schools so frequently. It's such a common thing. I can guarantee you that if they just passed a law in the United States that said every single teacher in the United States, if you want to teach kids, you have to carry a gun and you have to be adept at using it, you would see school shootings end overnight. Because what are you going to do? Oh, I got the gun out of my truck. Oh, I'm dead. Like it's why do we? It's the same reason why police carry guns. They carry guns to shoot at people for us, but they have to get to us first.
Yeah, remember Florida, 20 years ago, they had huge issues with carjackings. It was a daily occurrence. So remember Governor Bush passed the must help law. So if you carried concealed, you must give aid. So you can't just carry your gun for you, but if you see a crime, you have to give assistance. And the Democrats were screaming how if this passed, there'd just be wanton destruction of the streets. Everybody just shooting everybody up. And that was their thing. It's like, because people can't be trusted with their guns. Well, the law passed. I remember, I watched the video. It's like the law passed. The next day, some shit pump tried to carjack on the intersection. And like 6 people shot this guy, turned him into Swiss cheese, like from the streets. Like you just see all this stuff. He clumps down, done, hit like 30 times. Yeah. There wasn't a carjacking for 8 weeks or 9 weeks in the entire state. Like that was the best deterrent ever. It's like, we're serious. You try to carjack, you're gonna die.
It's the equivalent of playing the thief from the castle gates, you know.
Yeah. And but it was
all these conversations come down to 2 things.
Concealed carrying protects 100 that might be but aren't.
Yeah. But ultimately, all these conversations come down to: do you trust your citizen or do you not? So if you trust your citizen to possess a firearm, and the citizen has to go through the training and licensing regimen, which we all agree to some extent is a reasonable idea. We don't have the inalienable right like they do down here. But if you trust your citizen to do that, then there is no reason to further limit what they can do with their legally acquired property, and assuming that they're a responsible enough person to be granted such a license. So now, implying that is all true, what do we do to prevent this person from committing a crime down the road? Well, we know statistically that they're not going to do it because they've been vetted, they've been trained, they know how to safely operate the firearm, they know how to safely store it, they know what to do with it. And then if you want to impose further restrictions on CCW in Canada and require additional training to safely holster and unholster a loaded firearm from a concealed position for the purpose of defense of yourself, your family, or others, then that might be reasonable as well. But beyond that, I think, circling back to the entirety of our conversation, is all this stuff should be completely rewritten from scratch and abolished. Like the entirety of the criminal code section that discusses firearms should be gone. I mean, there's really no reason for it. I think we're all in unanimous agreement that this has all just been a ridiculous waste of time and a tremendous waste of dollars and resources from this country. We should be solving problems here and not over here, right? I mean, from the very beginning of the 2020 OIC, I've said you're solving the wrong problem. The problem is not with this community. It's not with this group of users. It's with the other one, the ones who are already criminals by illegally obtaining and acquiring and carrying firearms for criminal purposes. So if you're not one of those people, you can't make murder more illegal. Like it's already illegal, right? So I don't know what else to say on that.
Well, you're completely right, Van. But the core thing, which most of these discussions miss, is what is the goal of the other side? And the goal of the other side is to make people dependent on government. And that's the goal. And the way to make people dependent is, first off, you make them helpless. So every solution involves some branch of call the government. And then after that, you can tax them until they squeak. And that's the next goal, right? Is to relocate funds, keep everybody poor, right? You'll eat bugs and be happy. That's the goal. This collection of people are very independent. We believe in the general good of other people and that people should be trusted. It's the two sides could not be more disparate. And our failing largely is thinking that they're misguided. The other side is somehow misguided. They're not. They are not misguided in any way, shape, or form. They are operating to a goal and their goal is to make every one of you guys and your families dependent on the government. And that's the thing that people miss. They somehow think that liberals are just, well, they just don't understand. Yes, they do. You don't understand what their actual goal is. And their actual goal is to make all of us 100% dependent on the government.
Because they know better.
Yeah. Well,
People say, look at 1984. I'm like, you're seeing it as a warning. They're looking at it as an instruction manual.
Yes.
People seem to forget to realize that. I'm like, this works two ways.
Couldn't be more right.
I don't know, guys. I'll still box Justin Trudeau for charity.
I would pay a lot of money to see that.
I will make a large charitable donation.
You know what I will do? I will have an MMA fight with Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau at the same time for charity.
Just make sure you take that lock off.
And I've never even fought MMA. I'll still do it.
I'll sponsor that.
So did I.
Phil, make it. Phil, JR, you two can be my Don Kings. You guys make it happen.
And you know, so, but you're not going to make the opening bout the what was it? What the hell was it? The fat guy suits between JR and I.
Oh yeah, we gotta do that. Sumo.
How did we never follow through on the sumo suit fight with you two? How
the undercard?
TACCOM 2025.
TACCOM 2025.
Main event. Someone get Fred on the phone.
Yeah, there's enough room out there. We could do it at one end of the hall.
You know, we got to do this before you guys get too old because we can't have somebody breaking a hip.
Again.
No, that would just lead to a rematch.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all.
I'm not dead yet.
Now, Jared, if you guys do make this happen, I guess I'll have to come.
Yeah.
That'll get Vanya to TACCOM. Speaking of JR, Phil, Vanya, I know all three of you guys are going to SHOT Show.
Yes.
Are you not?
Oh, no, I'm going.
Excellent.
I'm going. Absolutely, I'm going. I'm currently trying to guilt Daniel into going.
Who, Fritter?
Yeah.
I can't.
Come crash at the house. We got room.
You got too many kids?
Yeah, and one of them's basically needing some extra attention. So I got to stick around the house and do that.
I haven't bought this camera just for
I thought of that before you guys got into that bottle of wine that one night.
I got to tell you, if you're going to have that sumo thing, there's got to be a particularly decent bottle of scotch on the line.
Okay, I've got
a good bottle of
a good one.
No shit, not from you, JR. The promoter's got to put up the prize.
Oh yeah.
Actually, Derek, I think we may know somebody who could probably facilitate that.
And it's not just a bottle of Crown Royal or something like that.
No, you're fighting. No, R&R. You're fighting for R&R.
You guys can
I think they should have the bottle of scotch before the fight. I think that would make for a much better.
I guarantee there'll be a bottle of scotch before the fight.
Yeah. Well, we have to lubricate our poor little limbs and our knees and ankles, so we definitely need the whiskey first.
Can you imagine trying to get onto the plane, flying to TACCOM, they check your bags, and you've just got two giant sumo suits stuffed into a suitcase?
And
I'm sure someone rents them.
And a bottle.
I'm sure they'll rent it in Toronto.
Oh,
everybody has their kink.
Everyone's got their kink. At least I'm not doing that on the way to Vegas. They wouldn't even bat an eyelash.
No.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in Vegas. And Daniel, I hope to have a pleasure to meet you one day soon.
Yeah, I'll be heading over to Alberta probably sometime this spring and whatnot. So, no, I've been pretty isolated in Kelowna the last little bit. It's been pretty tough since the kids came along. I mean, they're 2 and 4, so it's kind of like intense.
Dad needs to maybe cover the Rocky Mountain Challenge.
Mine are 3 and 5. Yeah, that's the way it goes.
I mean, Kelowna to Calgary, that's like a training road trip.
Yeah.
Yes.
Unless you've got a 4-year-old in the car.
That I'm going to be like, who's getting trained? Am I getting trained in how to ignore screaming for 4 hours? Because that's how that would probably roll. But
you're a dad. Of course, you got to learn that.
From personal experience driving on the Coquihalla with a 9-month-old, there were several instances of, should I just end it all and drive off this cliff? I don't know. But,
There's lots of opportunity to do so too. It's a great highway if you want to make that decision.
Great
Yeah.
view.
Okay, Van, you're married to Carly. You're used to somebody on permanent sand.
you know what? Not during road trips. We're pretty good. Usually there's a lot of silence when it's just the two of us, and then we break into conversation and strategize about things. But there's a lot of times where we're comfortable just being silent.
Well,
It's good.
I've never experienced that side of Carly.
That is true. That is true.
You know what? I'll give Anya
And I
some.
love her to death.
That is that is how you know that you've got a good marriage there, when you can go on a long road trip and nobody is concerned that neither of you are talking to each other at all.
Yeah. There's never are you mad at me because you're not talking to me? I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
What does it mean for your marriage when your wife tells you to stop talking on road trips?
It doesn't mean much. It just means that your name is Daniel Fritter. It's no big deal.
Pretty much.
That's her job. You drive, she talks and keeps you awake.
She
That's
actually
how
she
it
likes
works.
the quiet, especially since we got kids now. And I mean, I've grown to like it since we had the kids. The rare moment we're in the car together without the kids, it's like no one says a damn thing. Just gonna enjoy the silence for as long as we can.
Drive around the block a couple more times.
We've
Just
literally
like
done
you
that.
Yeah.
We've
You're
gone
playing
home.
classical music while you're doing that. You're about to turn into a serial killer.
So you can drive around the block a few more times for the silence. You just can't turn the classical music on at the same time.
Then, yeah, that's crossing a line.
Okay,
Great advice.
Noted.
that's good.
What
Guys-
one thing before we wrap up that I wanted to kind of put out there, just to go back to your point about future proofing, is essentially, I think, in order to help future proof ourselves, is we need to grow the culture. I kind of go back to a weird example, but prohibition in the United States. Prohibition ultimately failed because there was a culture around alcohol. As much as there's downsides, the culture was there and it was not going away. Therefore, prohibition did not succeed. People simply adapted and made their own, etc. Always not a perfect comparison, but culture is a huge thing.
I think
So obviously,
Derek, 100%.
when we change government, we need to be on top of changing and growing culture to future proof.
The mandate of the Alberta Chief Arms Office is to double the number of PAL holders in the next 5 years. That's what she said. Just talked to her. She said her goal is to double the amount of PAL holders in 5 years.
Rookie numbers.
So-
We got to bump up them numbers.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that
I'll
means like,
start with that.
yeah,
I'm happy. I'd be happy to start with that.
yeah.
Yeah, Terry's
think
a good person.
So I guess technically, like, how do we do that then? Like, is it apart
gotta
from
take away
just
the barriers to
doubling the
entry,
numbers? But I think we have to, take everybody to range, take your friends. Like, this is what we say when we have to give a speech at any event or whatever, as whether we're sponsoring or whether we're just there for whatever. A lot of times people pull us in to say, "Hey, talk to everybody," and we usually say it is your responsibility as a competitive shooter, as a gun owner, as whoever, to bring as many people to the range every year as you can. So every time you go out, you invite 10 people. If 2 show up, you've done a great job. It just starts at those small little increments. But I think it also philosophically, we have to change the perception around firearms owners. And I think that, I think you guys spoke to that earlier, with that the demographics around firearm ownership has changed in Canada over the last however many years. And it's no longer the perception of the crazy backwoods guy who has a bunch of guns and whatever, right? And a lot of people have those perceptions from media and from movies and TV shows and that kind of stuff. But Canadians consuming American media is very much I think a double-edged sword. But we have to really show people that we're reasonable people, reasonable Canadians that enjoy a reasonable sport and a very, very fun sport, and especially a very inclusive sport. And I think I've talked about this before, is that the diversity that I see in the shooting sports is tremendous. And not just talking about, the male-female ratio. I'm talking about every race, creed, religion, sexual orientation across the board. It's phenomenal. And I want to see that further expanded, right? We need to be widening the tent and making the tent bigger. And the more people that we have in this community, the harder it's going to be to get further, bans and attacks against this community. So,
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right there, man.
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, I'd like to thank all four of you guys for coming on. Obviously, this was short notice, but it was really great having the four of you guys together. I'll tell you what, I don't think me, Derek, and Mike have been able to sit back and just listen to the conversation for a really long time on the show. So thank you guys for coming on and for being who you are.
Thanks for having us.
Likewise.
Thanks. Appreciate the invite, man.
To everybody else, just before we seal this up, please consider supporting us by heading over to storydknives.com and picking yourself up a gardener knife. We think this is one of the best survival type / everyday fixed blade knives available for a very reasonable cost. We're pretty proud of this little guy. Working the YouTube grind pays less than running a lemonade stand and doing what we do to try to bring interesting stuff to our audience, like the sneak peek of the SAI R9. To our audience, it takes up almost all of our combined Canada carbon tax rebate checks. And as things are going, those rebate checks are not long for this world. So thank goodness we're saving the planet with taxes for now, but it's not going to last for too much longer. So please have a look at a great knife, storydknives.com. We're confident that it'll be on your side for a lifetime. And also, we would like to give a big thank you to all of our sponsors, as always, and all of our listeners. We're talking about Shane, Steve, Miles, Carrie, and Captain Duncan and Rob, Phil, Doug and Nisa, Vanya and Carly, Oscar and JR. Some of you guys are with us right now. Thank you all in a measurable amount. Special shout out again to thank you to Daniel Fritter, not only for coming to the show tonight, but for running Caliber Magazine and continuing to run Caliber Magazine and having a really great magazine that gun owners can have in this country. If you don't subscribe to Caliber Magazine, get your ass over. It's caliber.ca, correct?
Calibermag.ca.
Calibermag.
Caliber.ca.
That's right. Calibermag.ca. Get your ass over there right now and get yourself a subscription. It is stupid inexpensive. It was $30 a year.
Yep.
$30 a year, for God's sake. You don't even have to sacrifice your lattes or anything. $30. You get the subscription for a year. It helps Daniel continue to bring quality magazine to the country. So
and it is a high quality magazine. It's a beautiful magazine.
I'm gonna start blushing. You guys gotta stop. You gotta let's get it out.
I'm saying, I don't care what anyone's opinion is on the matter. Just go and do it. I want to hear the garbage. If you guys want to find us, you can go to bspodcast.ca. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/BS podcast. You can email us info@bspodcast.ca. You can email the Banyak boys, Derek and Mike specifically, Banyak, BANYAK at bspodcast.ca. And we've got Daniel Fritter, calibermag.ca. We've got Vanya, obviously Carly, for some reason didn't come on. She didn't want to take up all of our airtime, I guess, so she didn't come on. But Vanya and Carly, apexoptics.co. Phil Odell Engineering Ltd.com. Don't forget the LTD, because there's some sort of weird Odell Engineering in the States that has nothing to do with Phil. So it's Odell
sex toys.
Yeah, maybe it does have to do with Phil. It's Odell Engineering Ltd.com. Obviously, JR with the Sterling the Sterling Edge. Jesus, it's Sterling
Edge.
How many drinks have you had?
That's the new division, JR. Sterling Edge.
Yeah.
Edge.
And the
Hooters Edge.
The website is Sterling Arms. It's sterlingarms.com, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously the Sterling Arms R9 will be hitting gun stores in the next couple of weeks. Specifically, you can check out Target Sports Canada in Toronto. You can check out
right there.
Seawash Sports in BC. What's the city they're in? It's not Sterling.
Chilliwack, I think, aren't they?
Chilliwack.
Yeah,
Chilliwack,
I think.
Chilliwack. Check out the Wild West Shooting Center in Calgary.
No, in Wild West in Edmonton.
Edmonton, Derp. Yeah, West Ed Mall. And am I missing anyone? Like the big ones?
For the first batch, that'll be it, and then there'll be come by the end of February, early March. There'll be probably another 20 dealers.
Well, then all three of those companies will mail. So it doesn't really matter where you are in the country. Contact those guys if you want one, because they're not going to last very long. If you don't get the first batch, you're going to have to wait for the second batch. And you're going to have to watch everybody playing with their new toy. And you won't get to play with one. So that's just the way it is. Mitch is asking, what's the retailer? And it's Wild West Shooting Center. Or Wild West.
It's the one in the West Edmonton Mall.
It's in the West Edmonton Mall. And with that, folks, thank you guys again very much for joining us, and we will see everybody next week. Who's on the show next week?
We're in SHOT Show.
Oh yeah, we're at SHOT Show next week.
We're going to SHOT Show. That's kind of important.
You'll be leaving.
No episode next week.
You guys are traveling to SHOT Show, right?
Because we're traveling, and there will be an episode on Friday the 24th.
Are you guys at Range Day?
I think we are.
I hope we are.
We'll see you there.
Yeah. Absolutely. JR, you're not doing range day. You're doing.
No.
Rania, are you?
No.
No.
We got shit to do, man.
We got shit to do.
Business.
Business. Because killing is our business. And business is good.
I'm not sure what the list was about, but I love this.
Your pain.
Oh, that's right. You want to give me something to take your mind off that pain? All right. We will see everybody on the 24th for an episode. It'll be our SHOT Show recap episode. So thanks for joining us, everybody, and we will see you then.
Good night, everybody.
This right here has the ability with a 30 caliber clip to disperse with 30 bullets within half a second.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber.
You're listening to your weekly dose of BS. Ballistically Speaking. The Ballistically Speaking Podcast.